This is SOGCast number 10. My name is John Stryker Meyer. Welcome to SOGCast, brought to you courtesy of Jocko Productions and SOG Chronicles. I opened fire towards a shouting NVA voice 30 yards away and noticed George still there beside me. "Get out of here," I barked. He just smiled and fired his M16. I insisted, "George, get out of here. I'm the 1-1. This is my job." George fired another burst. I snapped, "Who do you think you are, John Wayne?" Return fire cracked over our heads as he raised an eyebrow. "Nope, just George Bacon. Now, let's shoot some more of these guys." I chuckled, calm again. Enemy fire had tapered off. Just beyond our visibility, about 50 yards away, the NVA were reloading, handling their wounded, if they had any, and planning their next move. They couldn't last long. I threw another tear gas grenade down the trail. In the heavy humidity, its cloud hung in the air like rising steam. Rather than stay where the enemy knew we were, George and I pulled back another 25 yards. Kneeling behind trees on opposite sides of the trail. Then a shout, and here they came, running and spraying their AKs, their bullets sounding like a ruler slapping the edge of a desk. Crack, 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 crack. George fired. Brip, 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 brip. I let loose my suppressed Swedish K. Puff, 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 puff. We shot as fast as we could. Magazines. And we changed the magazines, not waiting for clarified targets like you get on a rifle range. As quickly as anyone appeared, I let loose a well-aimed burst. I shot at glimpses of movement, muzzle blasts, breaking brush, a flash of reflected sunlight, a voice, any indicator of enemy. Our goal was to keep the NVA at arm's length, to throw their plan off balance, disrupt their aim, delay them, confuse them, and to make them pay in blood for any step they took closer to us. Their fire was becoming too concentrated. Twigs fell off trees, bark flew, dirt kicked up, and ricochets twanged past us. By now, there were about 20 NVA shouting and shooting at us. Skip a couple of paragraphs down. This, my first firefight, wasn't how I imagined it. The foliage absorbed so much noise that gunfire didn't sound half as loud as on a range. Unlike the movies, there was no exciting theme music, just the sound of my own heavy breathing, the weight of my rucksack, the sting of sweat in my eyes. I'd begun with a dose of adrenaline, but 10 minutes later it was gone. And what kept me going was physical conditioning and mental determination. My parched throat begged for water, but I didn't think about grabbing my canteen. I kept shooting. Enemy soldiers shouted to one another from several different directions, and again attempted to flank us, and again they met our grenades, arched, so they would detonate in the air. Grenades alone must have killed several. Then kaboom, flash, an ear-splitting explosion. RPG, the rifle-propelled grenade. The rocket detonation shook the ground behind us, narrowly missing George. I tossed my last tear gas grenade, and George heaved our last white phosphorus. We ran like hell as AK bursts tore into the dirt, slapped trees, ricocheted around us. We reached a low rise, paused, turned, fired at the sound of enemy shouts and breaking brush. Heavy fragmentation grade or two, then heard the most beautiful sound of my life. Covey. God bless him. It was Covey engines. Then the story goes on, and I'm reading from the book Secret Commandos. Behind enemy lines were the elite warriors of SOG, written by John L. Plaster. And this is one of 8 books that he's written. And John served 3 years in SOG, and he served here on the ground, which was his first mission.
My first where I actually got out on the ground.
And
yes.
so I want to welcome today John L. Plaster, the first, the one, and the only. And by the way, before that book, he had the first nonfiction major book on SOG called SOG. And in it, it's the history. If you want to know anything more about SOG history from a straight historical perspective of a historian, SOG is the book that you want. And John, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, John.
And
you're no slight veteran of SOG yourself.
I only had 19 months compared to your 3 years, sir. And so that was your first mission. And, of course, you're on the ground with George Washington Bacon III.
Just a great, great guy. He spoke fluent Vietnamese. He had been up at Da Nang when they had the sapper attack.
On August 23rd, 68, yeah.
August 23rd, 68. And that was the greatest loss of special forces in the entire history of the Green Berets.
And he was severely wounded.
He was severely wounded, but he went to the hospital ship at Da Nang Harbor.
Right.
And recovered. They probably wanted to ship him home, but George,
no,
I know, wouldn't have let that happen. But he recovered there and then came to Kontum and our team.
Yeah, and he was with us at FOB-1 Phu before he came down to Kontum with you all.
Hey.
And there he also, simply by hanging out with the Brew, which was another Montagnard tribe, he learned some of their language. And he was like fluent in Vietnamese, and he picked it all up. He's just a brilliant guy and a hell of a medic.
And I think he was helping the Brew translate the Bible into the Brew language, yeah.
Yeah, and we knew George, but nothing like you on the ground, having time with him, and plus being back at camp. And he was on your team for a while.
Right.
You two ran, at least 2 missions together?
2 missions, maybe 3.
Okay. And
but just a fine guy.
Yeah.
That firefight was perfect George. He wasn't going to let somebody risk his life all alone.
Isn't that amazing? Just another day in SOG with another one of our SOG legends, George Bacon. And this mission you had, there's also a couple of aspects. Even when you got near the end, you got to the LZ. If you don't mind, I'd like to go back to another paragraph or two, particularly the 1-0 on that target was your team that time, or was Ben?
Ben...
We'll get it in a second, but Ben was the 1-0.
It was 52 years ago. So.
Indeed. And so after what we just read through there, the firefight, you and George moved back. And so returning to the book, at last, we reached the LZ, but Ben and the team were nowhere to be seen. Across the opening, 75 yards away, a hand waved. It was Ben. George and I raced across the open ground, then leaped into the bushes among them. Looking back across the opening, I was struck by Ben's tactical genius. Instead of halting as soon as they reached the LZ, Ben had the men run across it, meaning enemy pursuers would have to cross the open area to get us, or sweep slower through the bordering jungle. Ben's quick thinking gave us an excellent field of fire and bought us time for the gunships to get there. While George tended to High's wound and Ben radioed Covey, and Covey, for our first-time listeners, is the FAC, forward air controller, and he talks to the people on the ground, and then he relates the messages to the tactical air, fast movers, etc. And so I arranged our Vietnamese to fight off the assault that was certain to come. Hardly had I finished when, across the LZ, several NVA soldiers emerged, only to be cut down immediately by our fire. Then the NVA laid down a base of fire and sent troops skirting the LZ to envelop us on our left. At last, Cougar gunships arrived, and Ben unfurled a neon orange panel to direct their fire. As quick as they confirmed our location, Ben put their growling miniguns on the NVA. Grrup, grrup. Enemy fire ceased. while the NVA scrambled to evade these fire hoses of tracers. Grup, grup. Then came 2.75-inch rockets. Kapow! A white javelin flashed into the trees. Boom! Lying beside me, Loy emptied his rifle into the dirt 10 yards away, his eyes scarred shut. I hollered at him, then knelt above him. AK rounds smacked the dirt beside me. I dropped, rolled on my side, and spotting an NVA just 25 yards away, shot him hard with a 5-round burst, knocking him down. It was the first clear shot I'd had. I knew I got him. So this firefight goes on, and you're at the LZ.
That was Ben Thompson.
Ben Thompson.
Bless you, Ben. Fine man.
Indeed, what hell of the idea, you get to the LZ and then run across it.
Right. A lot of folks would have said, oh, thank God we're at an LZ and stop there. But no. Well, as I explain later, it was not an established tactic.
Right.
He had tactical sense. As quick as he saw.
On the spur of the moment.
On the spur of the moment. I'll get across, and we can shoot them up if they come directly in the open after us.
If you don't mind, because this is your first mission, but this is a classic SOG mission.
Yes.
And then we are going back to the book. I love this book, by the way, in case you can't tell. Then we were above the trees, and I was totally out of ammunition. That terrible place blended back into the jungle. Just another grassy spot in a valley full of grassy spots. Kwang turned toward me and smiled. Smack! Thunk! He collapsed into a groaning ball. Blood everywhere. Ben tore off his web gear while I pulled off his shirt. An AK slug had penetrated his buttocks and exited the center of his stomach, spilling his intestines through a gaping wound. It took 2 pressure bandages to cover the wound, but worst of all, we could do nothing about the internal bleeding. Since George, our talented medic, was aboard the other ship treating Ha, we tried to divert Kwang's agony during the ride to Dak To, lighting a cigarette for him, pouring water on his intestines to keep them moist. And so you were able to get out of there, but just even at that last minute, you never know what kind of peril you're going to come up against.
And this is, I hesitate to call it that, little known fact. If you have exposed intestines and let them dry, they're like potato chips and they'll crack. And that's even worse. He has enough problems already, so you got to keep them moist.
Right. This is a vital fact I never thought about. Yeah. Intestinal moisture.
Yes.
Literally. So that was your welcome to the Prairie Fire AO.
That it was.
Wow. So back it up a little bit for us. What brought you to SOG in the first place? And from the hills or the flatlands of Minnesota,
yes, you
get into the Army at some point, and you decide that someday I want to wear that funny hat that keeps neither the sun nor the rain out of your eyes.
And it's hot in the summer and cold in the winter.
Indeed.
Well, I was going through jump school at Fort Benning, and a Special Forces, I think it was a sergeant first class.
This is 1967.
67.
Right.
So he stepped before our formation in the morning. It was 43rd Company. And he spoke for about 2 minutes. And basically, if you're interested in going into Special Forces, he was conducting a test that night.
Ooh.
So I went to take the test, and it was unlike any test I'd ever taken. It was very strange that he would read you scenarios, just like out of Mission Impossible.
Oh, is that right?
Right. Except there was no burning and the record burning up.
Yeah.
It was things like, okay, you're at this railroad yard. You're supposed to blow up the track. Where are you how are you going to approach it? And I mean, it was open-ended. There wasn't a choose A, B, or C. You had to decide these things. And at the end of the test, I had scored quite well. But then the NCO realized I had enlisted in the Army at age 17. And that was crazy. But there were a lot of fathers in the neighborhood I came from who were World War II vets. This was a blue-collar neighborhood in Minneapolis.
Right.
So it seemed natural. The nation needs us, off we go. What was unnatural was volunteering for airborne infantry in the first place. But nevertheless, took the test, and he found out that I was actually too young.
Ooh.
And he looked over the test. He looked at me. He looked at the test. And I reassured him, oh, well, I'd be 19 by the time I finished training. And he looked at the ceiling. He said, okay. But at that time, originally, Special Forces, you had to be at least an E5 on your second tour in the Army. But as a reflection, not that they were throwing out the standards, but as a reflection of casualties in Vietnam. They needed people. They had a great need, trained people, good people, but they needed people.
Right.
So they had relaxed it to the level of E4, and I snuck in as an E3.
Indeed.
And was an E4 shortly thereafter.
And that eventually, they called that the baby SF unofficially at that time.
Right.
Which today is the X-ray program, more or less.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So anyways, your baby son, literally, you get by all these hurdles, and then what? So you get through jump school.
Right.
Off to Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Right after that.
Right. And went through phase 1, which was really difficult. It is the phase where people wash out for physical reasons. And we probably lost at least a third of the guys, where you're living in a field environment and going down the Torres Trail, as it was called back then, waist-deep swamp, and it's deep mud, and you're trudging along with a rucksack and so on. Physically, a number of guys couldn't take it, and also they looked at it in the future. If this is what Special Forces is, do I want to have any part of it? And they left. But after that, it was academic. You had to pass various kinds of courses. For example, that was the only course I ever knew of in the United States Army where if you failed land navigation, you were out. You had to be a Green Beret. You had to be able to find your place on a map exactly.
Land navigation was critical to your survival.
It was critical. And the amazing thing is, on our operations in Laos, we were in an area as heavily jungled and as remote as the Eastern Congo at that time. I mean, there was nothing there except the NVA. Yet, I never once knew of a recon team at our place or your place, CCN, to have become lost. They knew where they were because of that training.
And good little people.
And good
our
little
indigenous
people.
troops. In my case, I depended on them a lot, particularly about, where am I, Sal?
Yeah.
And he pulled a map out and say, here we are. But so, and what was your MOS training?
My MOS training was a 05 Bravo Camo, which to my surprise, I volunteered for weapons training. And the colonel commander of the training group interviewed us one at a time to find out what we wanted to go into.
Really?
Oh, yes. And
wow.
He asked, well, let's see here, Private Plaster, what do you want? And I said, sir, I have read Small Arms of the World my whole life since I was a little kid, and I really want to be a weapons man. He said, you know what? You're going to be a great commo man then, because you already know about all those weapons. They had, just by coincidence, they had a bunch of slots for commo training, so
right.
Off I went. Eventually, I did get SF MOS qualified as a 11B4S, but my formal training at Fort Bragg was as a dum ditty, we called them.
05B4S, indeed it was.
Weren't you one as well?
Indeed, commo geek,
yep,
like you, yeah.
Yep.
I got recycled, unlike you who went into commo, you went through and trained up. I had to get recycled.
It was hard. It
yeah.
was very hard because you had recording code and then meeting I think it was 18 minutes or 18 groups per minute.
18 word groups
for
per
sending
minute.
and 20
WPMs, yeah.
and 20 receiving. And that was a black and white standard. If you didn't meet it, they recycled.
Arriva Dirty, you're out there. You get recycled or out the door. In our case, they needed folks, and by that time we had enough training that they recycled us and we lucked out and made it.
And the ridiculous thing is, in retrospect, they stopped using CW after that. Morse code.
And how many times did you use it in Vietnam? Never.
Once. But it was always fun, like to go to the drive-in and be sending a message to somebody else. Da 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 da. Somebody else had a car, da-da-da, da-da-da, da-da-da,
Yeah, indeed. Diddy dum diddy.
Yep.
So you graduate, then from there to where?
Went to the 7th Special Forces Group.
Which at that time was at Bragg.
I was at Bragg, and despite being a commo man, when I arrived, Company Sergeant Major asked, is there anybody, like 4 or 5 of us arrived once, does anybody here really like weapons? I do. And it was to run the arms room, except each of those companies in the 7th group had a cross-training responsibility for the other companies. Ours was weapons. So instead of just having 45s and M16s, we had Sten guns and Schmeissers and Uzis and everything under the sun. I'd spend my day polishing them, learning how to take them apart, reassemble them.
Right.
It was like being kept in the candy shop. But I was
all those boy toys.
Right, absolutely. And I was there about 6 months. And I had heard off and on that there was this woman in the Pentagon who loved special forces. Her name was Mrs. Alexander.
As in Billy.
Billy Alexander. And if you could get your hands on her phone number and call her up, she might be able to get you on orders to Vietnam to the 5th Special Forces Group.
Indeed.
So I went to a phone booth there at Bragg one afternoon, called up, and sure enough, I talked directly to her, and she said, I'll see what I can do. Very pleasant lady, nice lady. And lo and behold, about a month later, orders appeared, assigning me to the 5th Special Forces Group. Now, when I arrived in country, throughout the time that I was in training, we'd hear once in a while these 3 letters, S-O-G. And if you ask somebody, what does that mean? They'd say, I don't know. Or, just get back in class.
Yeah, it wasn't in the book, The Green Berets. How could we know?
No, how could we know?
Yeah.
And you could tell some of them knew, but they weren't going to tell you. But
Right.
many of them hadn't the slightest idea. And I'm talking about captains and staff sergeants, sergeants first class, master sergeants. They would not tell you.
Yeah, because by that time, we had SF guys that had been in 2 and 3 tours of duty already.
Roger that. But the rumor was that SOG did the real shit. Whatever it was, the real shit. The Special Forces stuff, the cool stuff. Nobody said the most dangerous shit you could imagine.
Yeah, they talked about the KIA rate.
Yeah. Oh, God, no, I didn't hear anything about that. But anyway, so I arrived in Vietnam, went up to Nha Trang, which was the 5th Special Forces Group headquarters. My good best friend of Special Forces, Glenn Uemura, a Hawaiian, who unfortunately, like every Hawaiian, is called Pineapple during training.
Oh, no, really?
Well, poor guy. Once he got in Vietnam, nobody did. But,
Yeah, no.
But anyway, so I volunteered for C&C. We had been at the Project Delta Club one night, and a guy I knew, Glenn and I knew, who had arrived in Vietnam earlier, sat down with us. We were having a couple drinks, and he said, how would you like to do the real shit?
Is that right?
Yeah. I said, what's that? I can't tell you.
Oh.
I said, but how do I? He says, just volunteer for C&C. I said, well, you can't tell me anything? And the other guy, there was another CCN guy there, and he says, well, you're going to get killed anyway, so you may as well get a good deal out of it, which included a week of stand down anywhere in South Vietnam between missions, and all kinds of neat little giveaways, freebies that you could take home with you, like weird clothes and knives and who knows what, which I didn't know at that time, but he just said there's some really good deals. So I volunteered. And a couple days later, there was this NCO came in from the S1 office, from that's personnel office, 5th Group headquarters. And there were like 12 of us who had arrived together, sitting around this table. And he passed out little slips of paper with everybody's assignment. And Glenn got CCN. Another friend of ours got CCN. And I looked at mine. It said Signal Company. It's because I did well in commo training.
Right.
Oh, Signal Company is there. And it's basically manning radios on a schedule 12 hours a day for the whole time. And, it's the rear echelon of the rear echelon. So I looked at it. I thought, I crumpled it up, put it in my pocket. And that NCO said, did everyone get your assignments? I said, I didn't get mine. I said, I was supposed to go to CCN with Glenn. He got out an identical piece of paper, just jotted down CCN and handed it to me. And that was it.
I heard about wanting to get into CNC and the SOG before, but never like that.
But I never
That's
knew,
a classic.
Even as I volunteered, I didn't know that CNC was SOG.
Right.
Because of the cover stories and the classification.
Sure. And then you came to the top secret briefing.
Right. It was quite the flamboyant.
Oh, Colonel Warren.
Colonel Jack Warren. We arrive up in Da Nang at CCN, and nobody has briefed us. Until they brief you, nobody really wants to talk to you. You know better
And
than
so
to
by
ask
now, you're in the
questions.
fall of 1967.
Fall of 67,
Right.
68. Fall of 68.
Okay. Correct.
Because I'd gone through jump school the previous year, and then
That's
I went
right.
through all the SF training and stuff. But
That's why I need you to be accurate. Thank you.
To remind you.
Yeah.
But don't hesitate to interrupt me and help me stay accurate. But nevertheless, eventually, like a day after we arrived, we were ushered into this little briefing room at CCN, and there's this map on the wall. We can tell on a big screen, a big curtain hanging over it saying "Top Secret." Well, we're just sitting here. We don't know
Yeah.
what are we going to do. Who are we? In came Colonel Warren.
Jack Warren.
Colonel Jack Warren. And this colonel, this is just amazing. He was wearing shower shoes, jungle fatigue pants, a black windbreaker, and a green beret, and he was using a
Cigarette holder?
a cigarette holder.
Yeah.
Yes, you know. So,
Yeah.
and a cigarette holder. So he comes in, he says, "Hi, I'm Jack Warren."
Not Colonel. Hi, I'm Jack.
No, he says, "Hi, I'm Jack Warren." We're looking at each other. Lieutenant Colonel is a big deal.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you just didn't.
You don't
go
see
up
that
and
kind of
talk
rank very often.
Well, at Bragg or anywhere in the
Yeah.
Army, you don't see Lieutenant Colonels, 05s, come just dropping by and say, "Hi, I'm Frank." So he walks over to that curtain and he pulls it aside. And I'm looking at, he's not saying anything. He's puffing his, for dramatic effect.
Indeed.
He's puffing on his cigarette. And we look at, here on the right side, the right far hand side, here is South Vietnam. And there's the South China Sea. But actually,
To
the
the
left
west.
half, all the left half of that map is clearly to the west of Vietnam. And there are all these little boxes about that big.
6 by 6.
6 kilometers by 6 kilometers, boxes drawn with grease pencil on there and little code names written beneath them. He says, "Welcome to MAC V SOG." He says, right now, and he's using his cigarette holder as a pointer. Now that's team, Idaho right now.
Right.
They're west of the DMZ about 6 kilometers. They're looking for an enemy cache site. And this team down here, Recon Team Rattlesnake, whatever it is, he said, they're on road watch. They're supposed to count the number of trucks go past tonight. And I just go, shit, that's Laos. We're putting guys in Laos, which supposedly was neutral.
Yeah. Quote neutral.
Quote neutral. And then I realized, up to that point, I didn't know. I was in SOG. I was actually in that secret organization. CNC, those were just cover names. And although we were assigned on paper, the 5th Special Forces Group, we actually were
Detached. Yeah.
And elements, the field elements of SOG. So initially I left, I thought, wow, this is fantastic. Because as a kid growing up, I'd read all these books about the resistance in World War II, the Norwegian resistance. I grew up in a Scandinavian neighborhood, and the tales of the resistance and how they raided that Hydro-Norsk plant to set back the German nuclear program. I thought, wow, I'm finally in the right place at the right time in my life.
Indeed. You landed in the high clover.
Yeah, but I didn't realize how serious this shit was. Initially, I was just euphoric because here I was where I wanted to be. But it got real after that.
And so then for a little bit, you go to Da Nang FOB 4, and then you get ultimately, did you get any time on the ground there, or did you go right down to Khartoum?
Not right down, but shortly thereafter.
Sure. Then down to Khartoum, FOB 2 at the time,
right.
Before it became CCC in 69.
And, I'd ask you beforehand, maybe we shouldn't discuss this, but I want to mention it.
Yeah.
My first team, I was training with a team leader. I had no idea. I mean, I'm new to SOG.
Sure.
So
this is at Khartoum now.
This is at Khartoum. It was Recon Team New Mexico.
Ooh.
I feel obligated to tell their story.
Absolutely.
So the team leader, his name was Stevens. And he was present. I went out a few days, training with him. And supposedly, because he had a guy down going through the SOG Recon school at Camp Longtan near Saigon, we were not going to get a mission until this guy came back. And that'd be, I don't know, a week or two.
Right.
So we're training along, and all of a sudden, we're called into the S3. This is war, partner. If they need you, they're going to take you, okay?
Right.
We were assigned a target, whether those guys are back or not.
Really?
Right. So total cherry. I did not realize it at the time. This would be Stevens' first mission.
Ooh.
He is
as a 1-0.
As a recon man.
Right.
As a recon man, which typically a guy would have 5, 8, 10 missions before being considered. And not everyone was considered as a team leader. But they were so short of personnel due to casualties, and there were so many demanding missions to run, that Stevens was immediately appointed as a 1-0 because he was a little older, and you would assume he had good judgment and so on. But when
the shit hits the fan.
Well, when the situation demands, you do what has to be done. Well, they targeted us. So we only had a few days of training, and we went up to Dak To. We flew by Huey up to Dak To.
And for our listeners, Dak To is the launch site.
That is the launch site. That's where our helicopters would refuel, where they would launch
and you would get a final briefing there with the air assets of your team leader.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So anyways, we're up at Dak To, and they've just called over the radio saying that Covey, the forward air controller, is out over the AO. He has seen the weather. He has looked at our insert LZ, and things are good to go. And just then, another Huey is landing about not even 100 yards away. And out of it step 2 guys with rucksacks and weapons I don't even know. Well, they come over and they huddle with Stevens. Their names were Simmons and Bullock. So it's Stevens, Simmons, and Bullock. And I don't know what's going on. So Stevens comes over to me and says, You're not going to go on this mission. I said, what? I mean, it was in my mind.
Oh, yeah, you're on the team.
This is the opening day of hunting season, and you're saying that you're rejecting or withdrawing my license. You're revoking it.
Yeah.
He says, the helicopter cannot carry all of us, including you. I have to leave one man behind. He says, these 2 guys I know, they've just graduated from 1-0 school down near Saigon. So we're going. We can all fit in one chopper, which he thought was really important. And so it's only one helicopter coming into the LZ. So tail between my legs, I waved to them as they flew away. And that night, I flew back to Khartoum, went to the empty team room. I was really disgusted, took off my rucksack, thought,
yeah, WTF.
Yeah, not chosen for baseball, okay?
Yeah.
Next morning, a runner comes over from the Recon Company headquarters and says, hey, First Sergeant and Sergeant Howard want to see you right now. And I go over there.
And this is Sergeant Bob Howard.
Bob Howard, yes. Medal of Honor recipient. Indeed. Greatest guy in the world.
Yeah.
Great warrior. But so I go over there, and I'm thinking they're going to put me to work on some stupid
or worse,
task.
commo.
Oh, well, it's not going to be good. Well, I had no idea. I got there, and they said, Team New Mexico was overrun last night.
Whoa.
He said, we're putting in the bright light team. And I said, well, I'm still not bright light. What does bright light mean? And overrun. He said,
yeah.
only the Recon Team New Mexico is you.
Wow. And then for our listeners, a bright light is a mission designed where a recon team goes in to help a team that's down or for down pilots. And when they go, they don't take any food. They take extra ammo and body bags.
And they did recover the bodies.
Really?
Yeah. So that was actually my first recon team, but I never even got on the ground with them.
Whoa.
And, I'm not a very religious person.
Right.
But I felt like there'd been intervention up at Dock Toe. I was ready to climb into the helicopter and go.
Sure.
And then that other chopper came in with the guys and they left. And that was the last time they were alive.
Wow.
They got overrun at night. We later, after the bright light team came back, they figured out, looking at the site, the North Vietnamese didn't screw with the bodies and so on. Sometimes they treated our guys with respect. Their bodies, sometimes they didn't. They were rotten SOBs. But they treated them with respect. And looking at where they'd been hit, they could tell they'd unwittingly left a visible trail from their LZ where they landed.
Right.
They'd been tracked. Bad guys waited for night, brought folks in, and they hit them with probably 3-4 RPGs right away, which wounded everybody in the team. And then they assaulted with AKs and a machine, at least one RPD machine gun. But so that you understand what an RPG is, I mean, that's capable of stopping a tank. We had more guys killed and wounded by RPGs than small arms fire.
Is that right?
Oh, yeah. Because they blast as such, and there
Sure.
was so much shrapnel. It was much more effective than our LAWs, light anti-tank weapons, the American equivalent.
Sure.
But anyway, so that they never stood a chance. They didn't get a shot off.
Is that right?
They were hit with RPGs. Boom! 3 of them simultaneously fired. The bodies were laying there where they'd been in RON.
Do you think that was the first time that the NVA sappers were used? Any indication, or just traditional NVA troops?
No. This is counter recon.
Okay.
The North Vietnamese had at least a battalion of specially trained counter recon along the trail. And they probably had one company along each of the major routes, feeder routes as highways coming into South Vietnam, like 922, the Ashaw Valley in Yerhont. Right. And 165. I learned a lot. Eventually flying Covey, I flew over these places every day for a year. And 165 came in about due west of Chu Lai. And finally, right into the Central Highlands, Highway 110. The main feeder route running north-south that was west of there was Highway 92, and that went all the way up to the various mountain passes going into North Vietnam.
Right next to Oscar 8.
Yeah, that's Oscar 8.
Yeah.
Oscar 8, which was a notorious CCN target.
Absolutely, yeah. Amazing.
So anyways, but the important thing for me was as never before, I understood what combat really is and how serious this was and how unprepared I was. I had all the SF training and airborne infantry training and so on, but I better get ready to learn all over again and learn fast. And the best classroom I found, I'm sure you'll say the same thing,
the clubhouse.
It was the NCO club.
Indeed.
Which, when guys came back from their missions, after the debrief, they'd come over to the club and have a few drinks, and I would quietly, because I had nothing to say, right?
Oh, yeah.
I would quietly sit and listen to them unfold the mission and the tactics they'd seen and how they countered it and so on and so on. I'm writing mental notes throughout this, so I can understand what I better know.
I know the feeling.
Okay,
yeah,
exactly.
Absolutely.
So I ate a lot of humble pie. It was no longer Mr. Big Bad Green Beret silliness, and it was no longer confusing it for the Norwegian resistance. What that very first mission, then when we had 2 guys shot,
Right.
one guy almost got his arm shot off, another one got gut shot. Once you saw what a round, and those guys were each hit with just 1 AK round. Once you see what that round can do
To a human body.
to a human body, you know your mindset is there. You know you better have your shit together. You better be good at what you're doing. And in all the sub skills, from marksmanship to land navigation to silently moving through the jungle, et cetera, et cetera. Those 2 missions gave me the mindset for the following years at SOG.
Wow. And I like to get back to the first mission when you're on the ground with Bacon, because
Right.
even the way it ended, there's a unique aspect to your storytelling here that I'm fascinated with.
Yes.
Because you came back, you're dirty, you're filthy. The way you described it, it wasn't until I looked at my dirt-smeared face in the latrine mirror that I noticed Kwang's blood sprayed across my jungle fatigues. I thought about our men's wounds. An AK slug had torn a hole, a lemon-sized chunk in High's thin biceps, leaving the skin hanging hideously. Kwang's wound was worse. And that's the one we had talked about with his gut shot.
Yeah.
And so you're doing this self-inspection, and then you said to yourself, I thank God it hadn't been me. I threw water on my face and then noticed a man standing there, watching me. Hi, he said. I'm Fred App. I turned and see that he was a lieutenant colonel. He shook my hand and asked, how'd it go out there, Tiger? He was short, gray-haired, with intense blue-gray eyes that conveyed an almost grandfatherly sincerity. Until that moment, I had no idea our commander, Lieutenant Colonel Roy Barr, had rotated home, and that App was our new commander. You responded, kind of bad, sir, but we got out of it. He waited for more. I looked in the mirror, critiquing myself. I ran out of ammo. Never again. Fuck carrying a handgun. I need harness space for more magazines and grenades. That's important, he agreed. Anything I can do? They didn't hear my Swedish case, sir. The silencer. Unless I actually shot someone, they didn't even know I was shooting. But when I did shoot this guy, he didn't stay dead. 9mm sucks. I need a weapon that when I shoot somebody, they go down and they stay down. Sir, I need a Car 15. He patted me on the back. I'll see what I can do. And he left. Amazing. And of course, he was one of the best
He was a fine
CNC
guy.
commanders during the 8-year Secret War. Just an outstanding soldier. And a World War II vet.
World War II vet, sometimes in the club. To get an idea of how down to earth he was,
Yeah.
he had a horseshoe pit made with horseshoes shipped from the States by somebody. And anybody who wanted to go play horseshoes with him, he'd play horseshoes in the evening.
Was he any good?
He was very good.
Oh, yeah.
But within a day or two, lo and behold, I got a Car 15.
And who was the supply sergeant at that time?
Oh, God. I do. Oh.
Was it
It's
that?
hard to remember.
Was it that Sergeant Bob Howard?
No, he'd already been replaced as a supply sergeant. The incredible thing about Bob Howard, 2 DSCs, Medal of Honor, Silver Stars, 8 Purple
And
Hearts.
put in for 3 medals of honor.
Right,
And he actually was put in for 11 Purple Hearts, but he only received 8.
right.
My God.
Because they weren't that bad.
Oh,
But
that
anyway,
Alabama soldier. Yeah.
Yeah. But Howard, by that time, was our training NCO
Okay.
in the Recon company. But if ever there was some heavy-duty shit to do, boom, he was going along.
He volunteered.
Right. And his final Medal of Honor mission,
He was a strap hanger.
he was a strap hanger. And this was just a little after the mission I described with my original first team that got overrun.
Wow.
And that was going after an American MIA. The North Vietnamese laid there and ambushed the hell out of them. But
Is that right?
yeah, the guys that came out alive were entirely due to Bob Howard. During the night, he even called a gunship, an Air Force, either it was an AC-130 or AC-119.
Yeah, back in 68, yeah. Or could have been
69.
like... Yeah, 69, okay. It could have been Shadow, Stinger, or Spectre was out by then. Yes.
Called it right across their own position because it was the last chance they had.
Really?
And he had been burned. He had been hit with a claymore. He had taken one AK round. But he did his damn best. Lieutenant Jerson, who was the platoon leader on that, he got Jerson. He'd been badly wounded, and he dragged him off the hill where all the dead were and got him down there. And that night, the perimeter was around Jerson. They were trying their best to keep him alive.
Yeah.
And for the only time I ever knew it to happen, the Hueys came in at night. In darkness. A 130 dropped flares, and they actually turned on their lights as they came in, and they got him out of there. Unfortunately,
really?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, you can do that once in a blue moon, but you're begging for ground fire.
Oh, and live to talk about it?
Yeah, but it so surprised the NVA.
Sure.
As they didn't know what to do.
You're doing WTF, and meanwhile, the Hueys getting in, they're getting those guys out.
Right. And unfortunately, Lieutenant Jerson died.
Oh.
But it could not be said that Howard did not risk his life over and over to get him out of there alive.
Yeah.
That was his Medal of Honor mission.
Wow. And that was the third one that he was put in for, that he finally got it. And then the other two were just Distinguished Service Crosses.
Yeah,
the second highest medal for valor. Right. Amazing soldier.
Actually, one of those was downgraded to a Silver Star.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, and if you actually read the citations, it's debatable which one should be the Medal of Honor.
Is that right? Yeah,
yeah.
Incredible action. Yeah. And he lived to talk about it.
Indeed, he did live for many years. I was at his funeral, and what the hell do they call it? His burial at Arlington National Cemetery.
Formal burial detail there?
Yeah, with a burial detail.
Indeed.
And it was quite a day for Special Forces. Everybody was represented. In fact, there was a motorcycle escort that brought in the hearse. And then they put him on the artillery.
The caisson?
Caisson.
Yeah.
With soldiers marching in front of him to his grave.
Wow.
And several general officers from Special Forces were there. We were all very well represented. But what angers me about the story of Bob Howard is I knew he had been approved for the Medal of Honor, and I came home on leave. I completed a year. I think it was my first leave.
Yeah, your first year in CNC.
First year in CNC. And I knew Howard was receiving the Medal of Honor. And I knew the day. I forget how I found out. Somebody told me or tracked it down. And that night, I turned on the network news. That was the day he was at the White House and received it.
No.
I've seen still pictures. I know.
Oh, sure, yeah.
It was right there in the Oval Office.
Yeah.
It was not on ABC. It was not on NBC. It was not on CBS. It wasn't in the newspapers.
Really?
The anti-war crap in this country was so heavy by the time he actually received his Medal of Honor that there were decision makers in the media deciding that to honestly present a hero was to glorify war, and they wanted none of that.
Wow.
This was...
No kidding.
God, he was cheated. He was cheated.
Yeah.
The nice thing is, for about the last 7-8 years of his life, people knew who he was.
Absolutely.
I think both of us went out of our way to make sure that happened.
Wow. Yeah. In my case, I had minimal involvement with him. Only actually had one phone call many years ago.
Okay.
Short and sweet and to the point. He didn't have no time to be talking about anything but the question. And, oh, my God.
But I do know once he got back to the States and he'd received his medal and so on, he was a little troublesome, you could say. Hard to control. He received a commission. Originally, we knew him as a sergeant first class. And it's funny because he refused to be a second lieutenant. He told him, keep your commission. I don't want one.
Oh, is that right?
Right. It's like in my case, I got a commission.
Yeah.
I had to take second lieutenant.
Yeah.
Because that little butter bar, to be a staff sergeant and then become a second lieutenant sucked. But he was a sergeant first class and a soon-to-be Medal of Honor recipient. They wanted him to be a second lieutenant. He said, nope, I don't want anything to do with it. And lo and behold, somebody found one of those little silver bars for a first lieutenant.
Yeah.
And then he was promoted to captain like within a year. But when he got back stateside, initially he was the commander of, I think it was Ground Week at Jump School. He was commander of Ground Week at Jump School. And then he ended up at Bragg. And Bob Howard, I loved him. The finest man I've ever known. And if you were going on the ground and knew that he was back there at FOB, you knew that no matter how bad the situation was, he would come out there to get you.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. But he was also one of those guys, I heard it said, that you keep in a wall locker between wars. And then you open it, wave them out. And
Like General Patton.
Yeah, kind of like that.
Yeah.
You get out of his way. I mean, he was a human dynamo. But anyways, at Bragg, they safely assigned him to run Camp McCall and the training out there. He put through a whole generation of special forces.
No kidding.
Through training group.
Okay,
out there,
sure.
Camp McCall.
Yeah, and that's the last phase of Special Forces training.
First phase. No, he's the first phase.
Oh, first phase? Phase one.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it's funny because I was out in Washington for the long after the fact award of the Medal of Honor to Mike Rose, who was also there at Khartoum. And this was only a couple of years, 4 years ago. And as part of the procedure, you go around to various places where their honors bestowed to them.
Right.
President Trump had given a Medal of Honor, and the next day there was a reception at the Pentagon. And lo and behold, here is General Miley. He was not yet the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff.
Right.
He's the head of the receiving line, but he was already the designated.
Right.
He was Chief of Staff of the Army. And I go up to him and I say, sir, how do you do? I'm John Platt. He said, I know who you are.
Really?
I said, really? Yeah. He said, he read my books.
Yeah.
But
all
here's
eight
the
of them.
amazing thing. Here's the amazing. No, he read SOG and Secret Commandos. But here's the amazing thing. Bob Howard put him through phase 1 Special Forces training.
No.
And we stood there for a couple minutes
Yeah.
just talking about Bob Howard. And he said he was the hardest man he ever met, that he'd wear a rucksack and do runs, and he was always leading. He's never saw anyone run faster with a rucksack on.
Yeah. I heard it from many people.
Oh.
He had miracle knees. He kept running.
Well, we know about my knees.
Yeah. No.
But Howard was magnificent. Just hard charger, hardcore, courageous, amazingly courageous.
Well, that if you don't mind, I'd like to go back to your book a little bit, because there's another moment where you had a direct contact with Bob Howard. We should have called him Bright Light Bob. He ran on so many bright lights.
Right.
To going back to help our people or down pilots. You had been running Recon for a while, and you remember by this time RT Illinois.
Right.
And they had a target, Alpha 1, and you guys were waiting for the weather. Another team, this time RT Arkansas, was wiped out.
Right.
And so there's that psychological impact across Recon whenever we lose a team.
Right.
So you're dealing with that. You come back to base. You finally relax a little bit, and then you get sick as a dog. And You're ill with some kind of fever. You lost
22 pounds in one day.
Bacillary
dysentery.
Good God, what is that?
I didn't realize how serious dysentery can be.
Yeah.
Because we as Americans look at it. We don't face it here. You look at it, well, you got the shit.
Yeah.
Give them
Take some KO Pectate and go home.
Yeah, that can kill you. You pick it up from bad water.
Ooh.
The fact that I think another name for it is black water fever. I was on a mission in Cambodia when I came down with that during the American invasion, because we were drinking
during
dirty
your
water.
second or third tour duty?
Second tour.
Second tour, okay.
And anyhow, we were there supporting the invasion of Cambodia. So I was
Right.
running out of CCS, Command and Control South. And we were out of water. And down there, they're not, unlike up in Laos, there are not a lot of streams and mountains.
No.
It's flat country and hard to find water. Well, one of my yards said he could smell water. And I believed him. So he got out his banana knife. It's a big
Yeah.
working knife.
Like a machete or something.
Like a machete.
Yeah.
And he just started digging there in this spot. And after he dug about that deep, water started.
No.
Yeah, so they dug a couple more. We were filling our canteens up. And I was the only one that got dysentery out of that.
No iodine tabs?
I think maybe we were drinking before we put the iodine tabs. We'd gone 2
Yeah.
days without water.
Really?
It was
Oh.
terrible.
Yeah, yeah.
So anyways, I was recovering from that.
All right. So you're sick. You're down for 2 days. You lose your 22 pounds from dehydration and whatever else is hitting you. So you finally wake up. I'm going back to the book.
Sure.
I looked up to see Bob Howard. He wished me a quick recovery and told me that he had a long talk with John Allen, who at that point had been the 1-0
Right.
prior
Yep.
on Illinois. And John had an outstanding record, fearless, great leader,
Fearless, just
amazing
the best
man.
of the best, yes.
Right. And so after what John had been through, they thought it best to send him down to Long Ton for some training. So Bob tells you, John's going down to Long Ton to instruct Recon 1-0 school. They could use a good man like him down there. And so in your mind, you're asking yourself, well, what about Illinois? Bob has the answer. RT Illinois is yours now. You're the 1-0, John. Take a couple weeks and train them up. And like, what did that feel like? Had you were ready at that time? Or were you a little bit surprised with this? Of course, coming out of the illness and everything and the fever.
Well, prior to that, I did not want to be a 1-0. There's
Right.
incredible life and death decision making on the ground. We often had people killed. I had told myself over and over again, I never want to be more than a 1-1. That's the assistant team leader.
Yeah.
He's at the back of the formation constantly.
I liked it back there.
I liked it back there. You're ready to ambush trackers or something, covering up the back trail.
Yes.
And if you were doing something offensive, you were there. You were the gunfighter, purely a gunfighter. The 1-0 team leader is making decisions, trying to keep everybody organized, trying to outwit the enemy. The 1-2 is packing the radio, but then you got the gunfighter. Well, I thought that was just fine. But then I realized I'd reached the point where I knew enough, and I think I could make the decisions. It was time to be a 1-0. There were a lot of guys that never became 1-0s.
Oh, yeah.
They didn't want it. And they were good men, but there is an incredible amount of responsibility. Because once you go on the ground, you're the ground commander. It's out free play. The NVA can do anything. You can face 5 men. You can face 500 men. And it's their backyard. You have to make judgments every day in their life and death. But finally, after coming out of that, Bob Howard telling me,
Yeah.
I was ready. I needed that.
Indeed. So you put together a team. You had some historic members. Was Norm Doney on your team?
No. He was the Recon First Sergeant.
Oh, I'm sorry.
At that time.
I
Yeah,
misread
Norm Doney,
that,
he
so
was an
thank
old
you.
Project Delta team leader.
Right.
Which one of his missions was actually in one of those men's magazines back then. Like his Delta mission, which was
Really?
classified.
Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, I eventually got a copy of it. I think it was Saga, SAGA magazine.
Right. Yeah.
It was like True magazine, or
But they had war stories.
they have war stories, where he had led his recon team into, I think it was down somewhere west of Saigon, and crept up on North Vietnamese in a morning formation.
Ooh.
And called artillery on them. Yeah. But anyways, he was our first sergeant at that time.
And he went on to great work with the POW-MIA issue
For
years later.
Totally dedicated to it.
Absolutely. And but getting off track, so you become the 1-0, and I like your book again, if you haven't if you're interested in SOG, some great stories from the man on the ground while he's there, and then of course the history. We're talking about SOG. Again, I encourage everybody. There's no way I can read all the stories, but there's you outline a couple of moments in time that people like other teams and how things can just change so dramatically. Like RT New York with John St. Martin was on a target.
Right.
They're preparing to do a prisoner snatch, and they're setting up, waiting, and they get delayed because of technical things and who else knows what happened. And at one point, John St. Martin was getting ready to launch the attack.
It was following up an airstrike. He just called an airstrike.
That's what it was.
Ahead of him, yes.
Yes. And so at that point, going back to the book, St. Martin pulled a grenade pin and stepped over the log, and he said, "We're going in." He shouted into the radio. As he cocked his arm, an NVA fire stitched him, cack, 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 ankle, thigh, stomach, whirling him around. His ears rang and the world spun as he pivoted backwards over the log and somehow dumped the grenade harmlessly. Pain nearly paralyzed him. He looked down to see his intestines had spilled out. He knew that few people survive such a wound and began to pray to AK fire cracked everywhere around him. And that's just one of those moments. Of course, Ed Wolcott.
Yeah, Ed Wolkoff.
Wolkoff. Thank you. He was on the team.
Right.
He
Assistant
reacted.
Team leader. Right.
Yes. And that moment, you go from being on the aggressive, getting ready to operate, to getting shot 3 times with AK. How sudden. My God.
John would not have survived, except he was a PT nut. He'd been a hell of an athlete in high school. And his father had been UDT in World War II.
Really?
Yeah, and he was I'm talking about John. John was a boxer. He played football. And he did a lot of PT while he was there at Khartoum. But he was a strong man. A lot of guys. Can you imagine someone who wasn't in that condition being hit 3 times by AK fire at close range?
You saw close range with one round, that other mission. Here's this guy gets hit 3 times, and indeed he did live to talk about it.
Right, but you have to attribute that to Ed Wolkoff. Ed Wolkoff dragged him, got him out of there, got away far enough that they were able to bring in a ship to pull him out. If Ed hadn't been there,
forget it.
Probably not.
Wow. And also during that time there, that's just another day in SOG. Our guys getting wounded like that, getting
happens
them out
all the time.
Under fire.
Right.
And when there's another time when you also had a mission that was in country, that in the beginning it sounded like a mission from hell itself for Ben Het.
Right.
And give us a little bit.
That was with John Allen.
Is that right?
Right. He was the team leader.
Okay. Because that one, this is different. I was never familiar with our recon teams getting into situations like this or going into a target like that.
Right.
And so you get briefed because Ben Het had been under siege for a long time.
Right.
They had a mission there, and your mission was?
There was a North Vietnamese anti-aircraft artillery unit shooting from a ridge to their south. And supply aircraft could no longer land on their airstrip, but they would fly and kick bundles out of the tail end of a C-130 or 123.
Right, just like Quezon.
Just like Quezon. And the North Vietnamese, they're not fools. They set up their anti-aircraft guns in a pattern to try to hit those aircraft. Well, our mission was to go find the anti-aircraft guns and hit them with airstrikes.
Right.
There were certain missions we went on in country, and it was true for CCN as well, where conventional units weren't capable of doing that.
Right.
No insult to them.
No.
But like Joe Walker used to say, it is so intense that it's almost a crime to send someone into that unless they're fully trained and experienced, because they're just going to get killed.
Right, and think of it, and that includes the hours of hot drills, going through
immediate
your
action drills,
immediate reaction drills, everything.
We did it every day when we weren't in the field. That immediate action drill is, and 99% of the time we did it live fire.
Right.
That is where it's a reaction, immediate reaction to contact with the enemy, because you're just about always outnumbered.
Sure.
So what you got to do is throw so much fire concentrated back at them that it's like a bantamweight sucker punching a heavyweight and then running like hell.
And then you peel back.
The peel back, right.
Right. Well, unlike the ranger tactic, which is to attack an ambush, when you're in triple canopy, you can't tell how many people are in the canopy, and your first mood is survive, gain fire superiority while you're doing the peel.
Yeah.
And that just doesn't happen overnight. You need to work on that.
I mean, it's
I'm biased.
It's like special teams in the NFL.
Indeed.
They drill on just certain positions, certain maneuvers, and they do it over and over and over again. We did it live fire most of the time.
You did.
And you got guys shooting right beside you. I mean, live fire here, there, boom.
Well, I think that at this point in time, with that thought in mind,
Yes.
your training was for another mission that, again, Chapter 10, Operation Ashtray 2.
Yes, sir.
And earlier, there had been an attempt. The idea was we need a POW from an area of operations that's really hot right now. An earlier team had tried it. They were not able to get a live POW.
They shot dead, several of them. They refused to cooperate.
Oh, no. Potential POWs
Right.
not cooperating?
Yes, potential POW. And this was, they had ambushed a convoy, North Vietnamese convoy. And, whenever you stop the enemy and try to take them prisoner, well, many of them are armed too. And they might not want to go home with you.
To put it mildly, yeah.
Well, unfortunately, those
Yes.
guys ended up having to shoot, and there were no live NVA left.
So with that thought in mind, S3 or S2 comes to you and says, John, it's time for RT Illinois to kick it up a notch, or were you
I
part
was
of
RT California by then.
Oh, that time, okay.
You're right, which I'd gone. When I went home, I had RT Illinois for a leave, and they got shot up bad while I was gone.
Oh, no.
They promised they weren't going to send them in, okay? Oh, no, we'll just let them rest while you're home on leave.
No.
Yeah. Well, lo and behold.
So you're
Demands
on leave.
of war.
They get
they
hurt.
needed they needed a team to go in somewhere, so they put them in.
And Illinois was one of the original SOG Recon teams from the early day. They've been running, by that point, this is 5 years.
Yeah, but they'd had replacements among
of
the
course,
individual years too.
Yeah.
Hell, they had to replace 2 of our guys.
Right.
But anyway, so Willie Murkison, who a DSC recipient from the Mike Force and our company, Recon company commander, took him in along with a strap hanger named Weems. They're both good men. Willie is the best. And we went on to another interesting career after that. But anyhow, they knew that they were being monitored, tracked, that the NVA had been moving around them.
Right.
And they'd had one small contact, but as happens sometimes, they broke that contact and they were going to continue the mission. Well, this is the day after that small contact, and they're taking a break next to Highway 110, within sight of it.
Yeah.
They're sitting there. All of a sudden, here come multiple trucks. Gates drop and out jump all these NVA, and they immediately assault them.
Whoa.
So I had 2 of my indig killed right there. My point man and my indigenous team leader.
Wow.
Killed right away. Weems was wounded, and I'm pretty sure the acting team leader was wounded as well. And they got out, but I think they had to leave the bodies because the NVA were just everywhere, and they had to run for their lives. So that is what happened to my team. That was not going to run any missions while I was gone. So when I came back, they had a bomb damage assessment mission for Recon Team Washington.
And explain briefly for our viewers what a BDA is.
Okay, BDA.
Bomb damage assessment.
for the first time in American history, out of curiosity, they'd put in strategic airstrikes, this time unlike World War II, where it might be B-17s. This was B-52s. And the Air Force, being the curious organization that it is, said, it'd be nice to have somebody go take a look and see what that did.
And they just assumed that all the enemy would be dazed and confused.
Right. And supposedly
or
just
dead.
walk in and you'll take some prisoners, you'll
take
photograph
a couple
the
pictures,
dead, you'll bring back important documents. Well, the reality was, that B-52 strike was kind of like taking a stick and whacking it with a hornet's nest.
Yeah.
And then that guy runs away and he grabs you and says,
and here comes Mrs. Plaster's little boy, John. Yeah.
Would you go see how many of those bees are dead? The North Vietnamese could not jump up, 35,000 feet and make life difficult for the B-52 crews, which hats off to them. They're all great people.
Oh, yeah.
But we could put in teams on the ground to take a look at it.
Little difference from 35,000 to on the ground.
On the ground. So for that one and only mission, I took in Recon Team Washington.
Oh, really? Okay.
Right. And we ended up having to call in airstrikes after a few days. We covered a lot of territory, but that mission is another story. So I'm already Recon Team New Mexico, Recon Team Illinois, and
TDY with Washington, and now welcome to California.
Exactly. Recon Team California, which were really excellent, those yards.
Oh, absolutely.
The prior 1-0 was Joe Walker.
Another legend, a SOG legend.
A taskmaster. He trained those guys so well. As one of the previous 1-0s said, he took them out to the range to see how well they operated their weapons and so on. It was Lloyd O'Daniels. And he said he looked over and he noticed they were watching him to see how well he operated his weapons.
Really?
Really.
Wow.
But anyways, so now I was 1-0 of Recon Team California with three other Americans, which was unusual, but they had the people, so I had three.
Which was rare.
Very rare. We usually ran with 2 or 3.
Right.
But one day, I'm in the team room for something, and a runner comes in and says, the S3 wants to see you. So I figure I'm going to be assigned some mission. And I go in, and there's this captain in there who'd recently arrived. He was a prior Vietnam veteran. He'd been a company commander in the 1st Air Cav. Good guy. He was awarded a Silver Star for his first tour, named Fred Krupa. But he was new to Recon. You can't just assume that someone, because of rank or infantry experience, is ready to do that job.
Right.
But he was a team leader, even though he'd only run about 2 missions. So Major Jax, who was a great guy too, is really hardcore. He had, as a teenager, fought the Germans in Czechoslovakia as a member of the resistance. And then after the war came to the U.S. and went into SF. But Major Jax had led Ashtray 1. It was a special mission. And he was told he could not do it again because he knew too many secrets. He'd been a staff officer and so on, and SOG was not going to risk his capture again.
Right. He had been S3 up at FOB 1 before he came down to FOB 2.
Roger that.
And CCC Khartoum.
RS3, which made him the operations officer.
And he had that was his 3rd tour of duty, right?
I think it was.
Yeah.
Yes, in Vietnam. So I go and I sit down. Yes, sir. What can I do for you?
Oh yeah.
And he says, well, this here is Captain Krupa. He's a Recon team leader. I think he had New Hampshire. He said, we're planning another Ashtray mission. They badly needed a particular POW just west of the Central Highlands of South Vietnam. There had been several briefings at Saigon where through various sources, electronic intercepts, radio intercepts, aerial reconnaissance, they had determined there were quite a few convoys and troops moving along the trail toward the Central Highlands. They want to know what they're up to. So the commander of U.S. forces talked personally to Chief SOG, Steve Cavanaugh, and wanted him to figure out a way to get some intel.
So we're talking about General Abrams talking to Colonel Stevens.
Directly
to Steve Cavanaugh, who was
right.
the Chief SOG.
Chief SOG, he was the commander of SOG down in Saigon, which that's where we actually took our orders from. It was, although we wore Green Berets and we were members of the 5th Special Forces Group, the reality was that covertly we worked for SOG. So the mission is, as Colonel Cavanaugh envisioned it in a very wise way, instead of just going out and grabbing some POW somewhere, some NVA, and bringing them back, if you wanted to find out what's going on, you grab the lead truck driver of a convoy, which is what Ashtray 1 had attempted to do, but they had to kill everybody. Well, this is war. These things happen. And because he was the lead truck driver, these guys were like permanently assigned for that section of the trail. He was responsible for picking up whatever it was for his whole convoy and then leading it to wherever their drop-off points are, the cache sites, turning them over to porters to carry south, whatever. So he would know what the cargo has been. He would know where it has been coming from, and he would know where it is going. Well, as I said, the first mission, they unfortunately had to open up on all of them. But now for Ashtray 2, it was going to be a combination of two teams, Fred Krupa's and John Plaster's. I had already run quite a number of missions and been a 1-0.
Right.
He said, you're in charge. Which that was one of the great things of SOG, is it did not matter what your rank was. It was a meritocracy.
Time on the ground.
Time on the ground. Number of missions and not just, cakewalk missions, real missions. And Fred just hadn't had that much experience. He's a good man, no question about it. It was never a problem working together. He was a captain.
Sure.
So we trained. We figured out, how are you going to do this? How do you stop? Our plan was focused on one truck, the lead truck, and as far as any others, it was blocking them so reaction forces couldn't come after us, or at least delay them. We tried various techniques. We tried foolishly it turned out foolish, to try dropping a tree in front of them where you have a charge at the base. And then
but how you drop a tree quickly and efficiently?
It can be done. It can be done. You cut it with a charge low, and simultaneously with det cord, you have a charge up high, and it cuts and pushes it down.
Oh, yeah. We did it a few times.
Okay, well, we did it, but it was not dependable. It might twist a funny way. Maybe the guy would jam the brake. Who knows what? So eventually we came upon a technique that had been used by John Grant in the first Ashtray mission, which was to create a semicircle of claymore mines linked with det cord, so that when you detonated one, they all simultaneously went off. And focused it, so right beside the road, you focused it into the road where you would knock off or knock down that front tire. And remember, the back tires, they stay rigidly going forward, but they steer with the front.
Yeah.
And he won't be able to steer. So that was our technique. And we practiced it. Well, the first guys were able to actually blow up a perfectly good 2.5-ton truck in training. We couldn't. We were the cut rate, Ashtray 2. But we trained heavily for it. I mean, we'd spent nothing but a solid full week, day after day, after we'd worked out the plan, exercising that plan, live firing, contingencies, truck coming right, truck coming left. The enemy is broken through. They're trying to flank, all kinds of contingencies. And we actually practice these. What happens if the driver is dead, but there's a live guy beside? All kinds of contingencies.
Right.
So that no matter what happened, as quick as it happens, we can react to it. Finally, it was time to insert. We inserted about a little better than 2 kilometers south of Highway 110, which is an east-west road running into the tri-border area of South Vietnam, west of Dak To. And we went in on the reverse side of our ridgeline from the highway, because that way, if the helicopters came in low, they wouldn't see or hear them come in. People along the road. Now, if somebody's out there, they would hear them. But the North Vietnamese concentrated their defense along the road. They were out there to defend the road, as was there. You could say there was a corridor of security, of reaction forces, counter recon.
And the counter recon troop, just so we're, one of the things that always the recon teams that you had to deal with was the counter. We used to call them hunter-killer teams.
Right.
They were trained,
North Vietnamese, right?
Yes, and they would come in very lightly clothed.
Right.
And they were highly trained. They knew how to get through the jungle, and they had success several times against our teams.
Of course.
Sadly, but anyways, that's one of the things.
That was probably what got my first team, Recon Team New Mexico.
Right.
But nevertheless, so we go in, and the first day's march, we merely cross what was an abandoned enemy base area. Probably company size. When the North Vietnamese wanted to take a break from fighting in South Vietnam, they'd come cross-border knowing American ground troops could not come after them.
Right.
They're not stupid. But because of B-52 strikes, they dispersed. So you might have one company here, one company there, one company up on the reverse side of that hill, but it's all a single battalion. Sometimes I think what happened to these teams that were hunted down and killed was that they unwittingly landed in a valley that did not seem heavily occupied, but all around them was a regiment that had been dispersed.
Right.
And they dispersed them so that if a B-52 we found a little base camp or aerial surveillance, aerial recon found one, they would only endanger that one base camp. But when it was time to fight the war, I'm getting a little carried away. When it was time to fight the war, they'd reform and go back into South Vietnam. We had not had any indicator of the enemy other than having crossed that abandoned base area.
Right. Of course, and again, you guys just walked through a base camp.
Yeah.
How many people walk through an NVA base camp, and luckily nobody was there?
Well, but you don't just stroll on through. I mean,
no.
it's like a big danger area where you deploy guys right and left silently and then send one guy running out to little cover till he gets to the other side. And then you move tactically through it. But you know, I mean, automatically you better do that.
I never walked through an NVA base camp, John. I never did that.
Yeah.
We saw base camps, but never walked through one. But thank you. We're moving right on to night two here.
Well, I'll tell you this. It was very well constructed.
Is that right?
Oh, yeah. The North Vietnamese are world-level diggers. Their corners, I mean, you could have used, what the hell do you call the right hand?
Oh, the angle?
Yeah. I mean, the corners are right angles.
Yeah. Perfect.
And there wasn't mess here or there. I mean, it's hard clay.
Ooh.
Oh, I mean, they spent a lot of time.
Yeah.
And it was very nice. And someday they'd probably come back and use it again. So they left it the way they wanted it for the next guy.
Indeed.
So anyways, we went through that, and the second night on the ground, it's probably about 10 o'clock p.m., 2200, and off in the distance, and we're all laying out.
And you're totally on the trail, dark. Everything's set up.
No.
No, you just got to the trail and you're just waiting to see.
Not
yet.
Okay. This is the first night we did not get within range of the road.
Sure.
Because we were like 2-3 kilometers south. And you're moving quiet and slow. And there are days that a whole day and you move 500 meters.
Yeah, because you're doing it 10 and 10. You move 10, listen, because that's the most important part is to hear how the jungle's around you.
That and the enemy is, you've got to be quieter than the enemy if you're going to sneak up on them. And you can't sneak up. When I instructed tracking, I used to tell folks, you either move faster than the enemy or you move, but the byproduct is you're going to leave a lot of sign. Or you move so slowly that you don't make noise and you erase your sign. You sterilize your back trail when you're moving. Don't try to mix it together, but keep that in mind.
Sure, yeah.
But anyway, so that second night, about 10 o'clock at night, pitch dark, and you can hear this rumble off in the distance to our north. Trucks. It was trucks. So I sat up and I'm listening. And then I look around and I notice everybody else is up too. They're all sitting up, which we have 8 Americans and 4 Indig.
That's a big team.
It was a big team, but we had a direct action mission.
Sure.
You know, it wasn't a recon mission.
And you trained up. I mean, to have that kind of training prior.
Right. Extensive training.
Yeah.
And a very carefully planned ambush. So what's interesting is none of us said a word to each other, but we all knew. Tomorrow night is going to be showtime. Because we're within earshot of Highway 110.
Yeah.
So in the morning, we start very carefully moving forward to the trail to Highway 110. And the North Vietnamese heavily defended their roads.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, they had all kinds of squads and platoons out patrolling generally. They had trackers and so on. But for the roads themselves, you could consider that adjacent to the roads, everywhere, there was heavy security. Because they didn't want ambushes. They didn't want POW snatches and so on. The closer you got to the road, the closer you were getting to a concentration of enemy. So we're down the last 500 meters maybe, and it's almost tippy-toe.
Sure.
We get up to within 100 meters, and you can just start to see the break in the trees up ahead. And that was going to be our rally point.
And 110's a major highway.
It is a major highway.
Yeah.
The major east-west route coming off the Ho Chi Minh Trail into the Central Highlands.
Yeah, it's not a little animal path. This is a trail.
No. This is a road.
Yes.
Something that used to irritate me was to see these pictures that the media would print about the North Vietnamese and these people carrying cases of shells on their backs or wheeling their little bicycles and
down a little animal path.
Yeah. That's what they do once they got inside South Vietnam, because if they ran their trucks to South Vietnam, we'd bomb the hell out of them and put in the 101 Airborne or something.
Indeed.
So they had to break it down at the border, and that's where the bicycles started and so on, where the real infiltration started. But anyways, the rally point is 100 meters south of the highway, and we cache all our rucksacks there, and the medic with the radio. I leave everybody there, but just Fred and I. It's still 1,500 hours, 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
Had you heard much track activity or anything
Not during the
at that
day.
point? No.
Not during the day.
Because they stayed off the trails mostly during the day.
Because they don't want to be
particularly if they're in the
spotted.
open. Yeah.
You know,
Uncle Sam's Air Force.
Yeah, they wanted, those guys, our pilots wanted nothing more than to go bomb those suckers. But, and they wanted nothing, bad guys wanted nothing more than shoot them down.
Yeah.
While they attempted it. But anyways, so it's about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and Fred and I alone, because you don't want to make noise. You don't know if there's some guards on the road along there. So he and I alone took our time. We crept up to the road. From that point, we were not going to leave eyeballing the road, where you could clearly see if there any forming anything, any activity, until the ambush. We'd bring the other folks forward. We wouldn't go back. And lo and behold, it surprised me at about 1900, 7 o'clock in the evening. It's still broad daylight. Here came a truck driving by. And I was angry. I mean, how dare you drive by in daylight?
Yeah.
But I believe it or not, I think they timed it for dinner time, or the turnover of aircraft on surveillance.
Right.
They're no fools. I mean,
No.
these people are trying to win the war without being killed. You know,
Oh, yeah.
they study. They want to know.
Their spies are working.
And their spies are working, which is a problem we had later. But anyway, so a little while later, here comes another truck, going east to west, heading back deeper into Laos, which undoubtedly was empty. Ideally, we wanted one going west to east because it had stuff on board.
Right.
But just as well, it was still a lead convoy driver coming the other way. We
Yeah.
had trained for ambushes in either direction. And I remember the second truck came by, and we're pretty darn well camouflaged at this point, hidden in the leaves. And here he came driving by, and he looked like he was having a good afternoon. He was singing to himself.
I love Ho Chi Minh.
Yeah, whatever he had to sing. But little realizing that 2 American commandos had him right in their sights. But good for him.
Indeed.
Good for him.
It wasn't his time.
Not his time. I hope he survived the war, because he was a lighthearted kind of guy. So now it's virtually last light.
Yeah.
And it's time to put out the claymores. They have to be actually on the road.
Sure.
To work. But not too far, because you don't want the truck tire to knock them over.
Right.
So it's one of those things I didn't want to delegate because it's so damn dangerous to do, actually stepping out on the road. And it's still light enough to see a little bit.
Yeah, we have men who were killed when they got on the road.
Absolutely, because there are bad guys everywhere sitting around just watching the road. And anyway, so I got out there. I placed 3 claymores. Linked with dead cord.
How far apart? Couple feet?
All 3 of them were no farther than one.
Yeah, okay.
And they're focused. I picked out a tree. You have to think, we really planned this sucker. I mean, we sat around in the club brainstorming on how to do this. Well, it's going to be night. How do you aim those claymores at a truck tire
that's
in
moving.
The dark? That's moving.
Yeah.
Best way to do it was to pick out a tree on the other side, and when the tire came in line with that tree, which is what the claymores are aimed at, boom, set it off. So got that set up. I went down. We brought up 2 more guys for the assault team. The guys are actually going to go out on the road and take the prisoner and secure and execute. And the other four guys on the right, 4 guys on the left were security to block anybody who tried initially to come.
And they had
at us.
claymores out.
They had claymores out. They had...
one for rear security for good luck.
Oh, they had multiple claymores. And they also had time delay claymores. So that as they withdrew, as part of their withdrawal, they pulled the pins to start time fuse burning. And then there was a non-electric cap. You know, there are 2 cap wells on a claymore, right and left. One cap well had a non-electric cap and time fuse and a fuse lighter.
Right.
And the other side had a conventional clacker and firing, so that if NVA came, boom, they could detonate it. But if they were withdrawing before the enemy comes, pop the pin, and I think it was like a minute and a half. And then one of the 2 or 3 claymores they had would go off. All this was timed. A lot of cocktail napkins.
Week training, yeah.
A lot of cocktail napkins went into this plan. But anyways, so and now I had the assault team up, 2 American and 2 Indig down there, 2 Americans and 2 Indig down here. One of the Indig has an M79 grenade launcher, and when they're ordered to withdraw, remember by then we've already detonated the claymores and snatched the guy. But when they're ordered to withdraw, that Indig fires his HE, and immediately he's got right here on his chest gear 2 long CS cartridges. I don't know, they had the little ones.
Right.
And these are 40 millimeter, and they fire them through the 40 millimeter grenade launcher.
Yeah.
Which is, well, that's another story. But I don't want to get diverted. Anyway, so they were then trained that after firing that HE, they would then fire 2 CS, long CS, as far as they could down the road in that direction, as far as they could down the road in that direction. So it's all about keeping them back while we finish our dirty work in the center.
Yeah.
Well, anyways, that truck's coming. Boom! I detonate the claymores.
Yeah.
Because I can tell it lined up. And remind you, those claymores, by the book, it says they're supposed to be 50 feet away. Any closer, it's danger close.
Right.
Honest to God, these were 15 feet away. But we were a little downhill, and I put them on the other side of a tree to absorb the backblast. And other than ringing our bells and flashing like crazy in the dark, and therefore I can no longer see with my right eye because I'm slow at closing them.
Oh, no.
I have to shoot left-handed if it's necessary to shoot, or shoot left-eyed if necessary to shoot. But anyways, as quick as those detonated, I shouted, assault. And all 4 of us guys ran out on the road. Richard Woody was in the end covering the back. I was going after the assistant driver. John Yancey was going after the driver because John was, a hefty, strong guy. We wanted someone that physically he wasn't going to fight him. He was going to push him down and hog time. And meanwhile, Fred Krupa was going to be backing up John at the driver in case he needed help or he needed to shoot some bad guy inside the truck. And we had practiced that if anybody fired from inside the truck, we'd all drop to our knees and shoot upward.
Right.
That's the only practical way, because others are shooting. It's called fratricide.
Oh.
But and hope for the best, because a ricocheting round still could have gotten us. But nevertheless, there's no assistant driver. My job was to run around and, if necessary, kill the assistant driver.
Right.
The truck's halted. It jerked to a stop, like within a meter of where it was hit with the claymore.
Yeah.
And John's up there, whips that door open. Meanwhile, he had a pair of bolt cutters over his shoulder, big bolt cutters.
Oh, because the guys are chained themselves?
Because sometimes the drivers would be chained to the wheels. North Vietnamese sometimes did that, so that the drivers would not abandon their trucks in an airstrike.
So the Communist Party would be willing to sacrifice their people?
Of course they would.
Yeah.
It's not even. Why do you ask the question?
Yeah.
Of
Well,
course.
a lot of our listening audience is not aware of the cruelty to their own people from the communists and socialists.
There's a great story from the siege of Dien Bien Phu.
Uh-huh.
If you ever read Hell in a Very Small Place, a book by the French writer, in which the French
Bernard Fall?
Bernard Fall, right.
Yeah.
But where the French have just surrendered, and the prisoners are being led out, and there's a badly wounded Viet Minh laying there in an area where there's a minefield, and the other troops, the Viet Minh, are stepping on him to get through the minefield. And one of the French officers said, "You should get that guy out of there and treat him." He said, "No, he's already made his contribution to the party." Oh, wow.
Oh, my God. That's one heck of a contribution.
Yeah. So meanwhile, back at the ranch.
Back at the ranch,
John has... turns out these guy's not chained, so John happily throws away, when we're done, as quickly as he can, these heavy bolt cutters he'd been carrying. He has a Browning high power, cocked and ready to go in his right hand. Left hand, he reaches in, he jerks that guy out. It's like a wet dishcloth. Just whoop, boom, and he's down on the road. And then Fred Krupa, who had been his direct support right there, fashions some plastic handcuffs around the guy. And they're ready to go. So I go back, I join them, make sure they're ready to go, and I tell them, "Get out of here." And I go near Woody. I step near Woody, who had been covering the back of the truck, about that far away from Woody.
Yeah.
And I yell, which is how we trained, "Withdraw, withdraw," it's top of my lungs.
Yeah.
But then Woody, to reinforce it as we had trained, because who knows, I might have been wounded or something.
Right.
He'd blow twice on the whistle.
Sure.
So, we tried to cover every contingency.
Yeah.
So Woody blows twice, and when he blows the second time, boom, boom, he was shot twice, that close, right there.
No.
Took an AK round through his left forearm and his right forearm, and it broke the bones. And he was badly hit, very badly hit. Well, now we've got a seriously wounded guy. John Yancey and Fred are leading the prisoner back to the rally point. Well, I'm there now with Rex Jocko, who had the security on the left flank. And the NVA are out there now. We're about to be engaged. Well, what the hell do you do?
Yeah, 3 claymores in the middle of the night gets people's attention.
Well, they tend to sit up and listen. and there were NVA. There's security forces all over the place along the highway. So I took one of Woody's arms. I'd opened up a couple buttons on his jungle shirt, shoved it in that way, and
Wow.
then shoved it in this way. I mean, this is something I was never learned in school. It was
Yeah.
like, think of something to do quick. And then I buttoned it over it so that his arms would be held up.
Yeah.
And then Rex led
His
him back
broken
into the
arms.
jungle. Broken arms. So Rex led him back, and they needed some time. We got a prisoner, and we got a seriously wounded American. They needed to buy some time. So I stayed at the truck, shooting it out with the NVA. I didn't have to shoot a lot, but
Yeah.
but somebody was out there close because they'd shot Woody
Yeah.
twice. And anyway, so I'm shooting
With
whenever
accurate fire.
very accurate, very accurate. I'm sure they were intended to shoot center mass, but they ended up getting both arms. And anyway, there's a little bit of fire. We had also devised these charges to delay the NVA if they wanted to pursue us. Each man had about 5 of these in a claymore bag, where you take a fragmentation grenade,
Right.
remove the handle and
The explosive.
chip,
Yeah.
or excuse me, the
It's the handle and the charge inside.
handle,
Yeah.
yeah, and the firing cap,
Yeah, there we go.
and then put a non-electric cap in, and cut to a precise length. It's not dead cord. Fuse, time fuse,
Yes,
time
yeah.
fuse. Old age setting in. Time fuse. It's only 50 years ago.
That's all.
Time fuse, and then a fuse lighter, and then wrap it around like a mummy and cover it with black tape, so that, let's say it's got 5 minutes of time fuse on it. You pop it, and as they're withdrawing, there wasn't anything fancy. Each guy was just supposed to randomly throw one this way, take a few steps and throw one that way, and it was a combination of white phosphorus grenades, high explosive HE frag
Right.
grenades, and CS grenades, tear gas.
Oh, CS too.
Oh, yes, which I invented a way to set them off with time fuse, but that's a long technical thing. Anyway, so each of the guys had a combination of these in that claymore bag. The idea was to set up a sort of self-detonating minefield behind us, that as the NVA went into the jungle after us, these things would randomly, seemingly, go off, and they would assume that someone had thrown a grenade at them. They'd be choking from the tear gas. The WP going off would blind them
Right.
from the flash, etc.
Hopefully burn a couple.
I like to kill them gently. Anyway, you know.
Yeah.
I believe in fighting fair. But anyways, so these were timed so that as they were withdrawing and throwing out, even the way they were stacked in the bags
Yeah.
was such that the shortest fuse ones, which were close to the road, would be grabbed first, until finally at the very bottom of the bag, the last one was like, I don't know, the longest one was like 9-10 minutes.
Right.
Which when you put enough that time fuse around
Oh,
it,
yeah.
and you got tape around this thing, around the grenade that big. So anyway, these guys are pulling back, and I'm having a difference of opinion with the NVA. Somebody, one of the bad guys, threw a grenade, and I'm damn fortunate, because had it been one of ours,
Forget it.
I would have been dead on the spot.
No
but
kidding.
it was one of the Chinese ones, which were notorious. They were like the World War II pineapples,
Right.
and they were erratic. They break apart this way, break apart that way. Well, I only picked up one small piece of shrapnel,
Whoa.
although the blast knocked me to the ground.
Is that right?
Oh, absolutely. But I got up, fired a little more,
Yeah.
and I'd already placed a thermite grenade on the hood of the truck. Thermite burns at 2,000 degrees. It's a destruction device. It will burn right through that hood and into the engine block, so they're not going to use that truck again. And secondly, I'd also...
And for good luck.
And for good luck. For good luck, I also had a satchel charge with a couple of blocks of C4. So it's probably like 4 pounds of C4, maybe.
Right.
And it had like 5-minute time delay on it. So once I popped those,
Yeah.
I better get away and get away
time to
quick.
get rolling,
Yeah. So I'm now back in the jungle, headed for the rally point where everyone already is. And now some NVA reached the truck. and they're on the other side of it, and they're just free shooting. They're just hoping to hit something into the jungle.
Right.
I think they're probably a little fearful of coming into the dark after us, understandably. But that fire continues for about a minute, then boom! That satchel charge goes off, the firing ends. For now.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, remember, the rest of the convoy has halted. They're backed up.
Yeah.
From 100 meters on down. And now we're taking off through the jungle. Not real fast because of Woody.
Sure.
In fact, Woody, we were going to give him
Morphine?
Morphine. A half syringe of morphine.
Right.
But he thought it would slow us down. He refused morphine. And can you imagine the pain he was going through? 2 broken arms
from AK
and
rounds.
Gunshot wounds. Great man. Wow.
Oh, my God.
Anyways, but even without the morphine, you can't run. And it's dark, and you're feeling your way through and trying to stay on compass in a certain direction. Well, the plan that we'd had approved at Saigon was that once we withdrew, a C-130, a C-130 gunship, a Spectre with 20 millimeter Vulcan and
miniguns
and 40. They had 40s in them.
40s by that point,
but not 105s.
No 105s yet. Okay.
But anyways, they had
and
tremendous
flares if you needed them.
Right, but they had tremendous firepower.
Oh yeah.
And that truck's now burning. What could be better? Well, he was supposed to, not he, but the AC-130 was supposed to be about 20 miles away to the north, flying in orbit, waiting for our ambush. And once we withdrew, he was supposed to go up and down the road, just shooting anything that moved, or even anticipating movement. That had been approved at highest channels. I called up a radio relay site on a mountain. Leghorn.
Yeah.
We were within line of sight of Leghorn, which was rare.
Really, really big.
Very rare. One of those times at night you actually could get somebody on the other end. Most of the time we just shut our radio off because nobody would answer anyhow. But anyways, they didn't know anything about it. So back at Khartoum, they learned that we have conducted the ambush and we have the prisoner and we're running for our lives. We had a new commander that had just taken over that day from Colonel App. I wanted so much to bring that prisoner back and hand him to Colonel App.
Yeah, yeah.
But we had a new guy, and he was of questionable judgment. He was
no Colonel App.
Oh, no. But I'm his tactical judgment. He didn't belong where he was.
Right.
Not his fault.
Yeah.
But somebody else did not have the guts to, some of a higher rank, look him in the eye and say, okay, you're going to serve in the 77th Mess Kit Repair Company.
Yeah.
Instead, he ended up MAC SOG. But he learns about it, and he's new. He doesn't know up from down. He doesn't really read into SOG other than maybe a briefing. And it's perfectly fine to him to wait till the next morning to send out an aircraft and see how we're doing.
What?
We are running through the dark. Well, we're not running, but we're moving through the dark. We have just kicked the crap out of the NVA, and they are very angry because not only did we kill some of them, but we have one of their guys.
And they know it. So thank God for Lloyd O'Daniels. He heard that shit, and he said, this is bullshit, total bullshit. And Lloyd was where at the time?
At the FOB, back at Khartoum. Yeah. And he had been a Covey rider. So Lloyd raised enough hell that finally they got a Huey to fly him up to Pleiku, put him in a FAC aircraft. They flew out at night. They didn't get over us till almost midnight. But by then there were 2 trucks burning.
Really?
Oh, yeah. And from 10 miles away, he could see the flames. So he'd already ordered air before he got out there. His pilot did. So they spent a couple hours strafing and bombing that road. They got more trucks yet.
Wow.
And it just so preoccupied the enemy at that point that I think that became their priority, to get the hell out of the airstrikes.
Yeah, let's survive tonight.
Yeah, I mean, talk about a perfect night beacon for calling air. So anyways, now it's dawn. The next morning, I mean crack of dawn.
Yeah.
And this was the only time I had this happen. Typically, our Hueys and Cobra gunships would arrive at Khartoum about 0700, get a quick brief, and then fly up to Dak To. Well, they took off in darkness. They flew to Dak To and refueled right at the crack of dawn.
Wow.
So they were out there like 0700, which was only time I ever knew that to happen. And Covey put in a little bit of air around us. But then here came an A1 with CBU. This was going to be the final pass.
Right.
We look up, and it was the only time I ever really appreciated how much CBU was coming. Because I looked up, and here's all these twinkling things.
Oh, yeah.
And it's the sun reflecting off all these spinning balls. They're about the size of a baseball.
Yeah.
About the size of a softball. They're all coming down. I go, oh, shit, that's coming down on us. And we all press our bodies to the ground. And there is a God. He shined on me again that day because I can't believe it, not a one of us was hit.
Really?
And we had explosions there. We had explosions there. We had explosions there.
Everywhere but on your ass.
None of us got hit.
Oh, my God.
But we are all flat.
Yeah, yeah.
Now the lead Huey came in, got the prisoner and Yancey and a couple guys out, and then a second Huey, and by God, we're on our way back. And what was fantastic, we got back to the helipad at Khartoum at FOB2.
Yeah.
And the whole compound was out there.
With cold beer.
Oh, yeah, with cold beer. But they did that for every mission that came back.
Well, of course.
I'm sure they did that for you guys, too.
Usually.
Okay. But I mean, the whole compound. Everybody is out there. And it was such an atmosphere. It was just fantastic. And here's this poor NVA. At one point, he tried to wrestle out of his restraints.
Yeah, yeah.
And somebody I know had to punch him. So he also had a bloody nose. And he got all this blood on him and stuff.
Yeah.
The guy was playing games. There was no time to play games.
No.
So
Welcome.
So they led him off to get him ready to go because SOG had already diverted one of their C-130 Blackbirds to Khartoum, and it was going to be there in 30 minutes. So prisoner was going to be taken immediately for immediate intelligence because they had aircraft ready to go depending on what this guy had to say.
Sure.
And I was told that I would also go along with him. Fine with me. So I still had on the same fatigues, smeared camouflage paint, couple days growth of beard, and I had a pistol.
A little blood from Woody.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
Okay. But anyways, I also had a .45 automatic. So we get down to the airfield. I don't know if I should tell this story. We get down to the airfield.
Years later, you're okay.
Yeah, I'm okay. We get down to the airfield, and we have this intel officer, a captain with us,
mm-hmm.
and he's a soft guy.
Ooh.
Not very hardcore. And to be nice, he lets the guys, all this time he's been blindfolded. He lets the guys blindfold down because he thinks that's a humane thing to do. And this guy's, can't believe all this stuff. He's been living in the jungle on 2 squares a day. A square is a handful of rice.
If you're lucky. Yeah.
If you're lucky. And he looks around at all this stuff, and I can tell he's a little bit of shock. And then he said, "De dao, de dao." In Vietnamese, that means I got to take a leak. And he's kind of pushing because where's the restraints in the front? I think those restraints were in the front. No, they were in the back. They had to be in the back.
Yeah.
So he's kind of pushing them out like he thinks we're going to take the restraints off. Does that look like I'm that stupid? The guy is ready. He's going to make a run for it. He's going to grab somebody, try to do whatever he's going to do. But he's faced that point of die or I'm going to be taken someplace in an airplane now.
Yeah.
So the guy clearly had to take a leak. So I walked over. I undid his fly. I pulled out his prick.
Yeah.
And I told him, dee-dow, dee-dow. And he did. He took his leak. And then I politely put it back in, buttoned him back up. I was not going to risk anything like that happening.
Yeah, no kidding.
I mean, if we had to kill him there at the airfield because he's trying to grab somebody a grenade or gun or something, we've achieved nothing.
Yeah.
Other than blowing up some trucks, which isn't bad either. So anyways, what's kind of cool is we're heading down. We're on the board, the C-130 flying down. They sent another guy along, his name Burkus, as a guard for the prisoner. But I'm there too, and I have my 45. But I have it out. I just have it laying on my lap, and I just keep giving him the "don't forget who I am" look. And he can't look at me. Every once in a while he looks my way. It's what I'm really telling him is don't try anything funny.
Yeah.
Remember, I'm the guy that had you by the dick. And I've got a 45 automatic, and I will shoot you if I have to. But I don't want to. I want you to get down there alive.
Yeah.
So by God, we landed down in Saigon, and I don't know why, but the Blackbird landed in front of the Tan Son Nhut civilian terminal.
No.
Yes. Who am I to say? They got us to Saigon. But there were places you could park on that airfield where you could do all kinds of secret stuff and nobody'd see it. But lo and behold, we're, 60 yards from the terminal. Now, it's not like they're a bunch of civilians. It's mostly soldiers.
Yeah.
Marines, Air Force, whatever. And I get out of the back of the 130. They put the ramp down. We walk down the ramp. And just to keep the right perspective on this guy, I pulled out my 45, and I have him by the restraints. And I'm walking him because I'm looking for the SOG van that's supposed to be there to pick us up. And walking around, and all these legs, all these non-SF, non-airborne rear echelon types, they get a good look at me, and they don't want to find out. They don't want to find out. They're not that curious. So about 5 minutes later, van showed up, picked us up, and took us to SOG headquarters.
Wow. What a mission.
That was without question the best mission I ever ran.
No kidding. That's a classic. So that was your second tour?
Yes.
So for an entire year, you ran Recon for a second tour, or do you begin flying Covey at some point during your second tour of duty? I
fly the last year I'm there.
Okay.
I spent 2 years running Recon. The proud thing, I don't like people shouting crap, but the thing that I'm proud of is I never punked out.
Yeah.
I never, on the ground, thought of myself. If you're a team leader, you're thinking of your team. And there are times when everything that nature's telling you to do is run, get the hell out of here.
Yeah.
But I never succumbed to that.
Yeah.
Which I guess it's a kind of, hysteria. But I always stood my ground with my team, and I did not put myself out of risk if the team was in risk.
Indeed.
And that was hard to do sometimes.
Absolutely. And we're talking 22 missions across the fence.
Roger that.
Wow. So, okay, let's end the second tour.
Okay.
You go back, and then you come back for a third tour of duty, and somehow you get back to Khartoum again?
What happened is I had an extension leave.
Okay. Yeah.
Came home, and I'd already been assigned. Had I? Yeah, I'd come back from an extension leave. And now I have RT Hawaii again. Now, here's team number 5, RT Hawaii, and I'm the 1-0. And we run a mission on the Laotian border where the mission was to confirm that a particular trail, a large trail but not a road, was being used by the NVA. And of all things, that supposedly they were using elephants because it was kind of up in the mountains.
Sure.
And I then hand-built an elephant mine. I liked experimenting with them. I made a lot of crazy stuff. Some worked, some was just never off the drawing board.
Indeed.
But anyways, I took a beer can, packed it with C4, and then on the top, I put a toe popper mine. So you could say it's a reinforced M17 toe popper.
Right.
And when we got to that trail, anyway, this was an RT Hawaii mission. I got out my banana knife, dug real careful. There's a technique to placing a mine.
Oh, of course.
I put my hat down there, scraped the trail. The trail's pretty hard, Pat.
Okay.
I wanted that light colored dirt on the top separate.
Right.
So I put that there, and then I dug with my knife to loosen it, scooped it out, and put it in my hat, which I would then dump in the jungle. Got the mine in, armed it, praying to God it didn't go off. and then I put on just enough of that raw dirt, the dark dirt, to pretty well cover it. And then I smoothed back. I was very careful.
That's a skill set.
Because that is an armed mine.
Yeah.
I spread it back so that it was perfectly smooth and like anywhere else along that trail. That night, we were up on a hillside maybe a kilometer away. And I think we were sitting around eating chow before dark. And boom! You know? Initially, you're thinking about chuckling or something, but somebody's really screwed up now. Might have been an indige, or not an indige. It might have been a human being, one of the NVA. Might have been an elephant. I didn't hear, an elephant trunk sounding off. But there was one more mission after that with RT, and that was my last. What's coming up is my last mission. Going in on an LZ right adjacent to the Laotian border, northwest, almost due west of Dak Siang Special Forces Camp.
Right.
And we had this big grassy area kind of on the side of a hill. We were supposed to land in that grassy area. And chopper got in as low as the pilot was a new guy. I didn't realize it.
Oh, yeah.
And he put in close enough that the skids were about as high as the ceiling here, maybe more.
Yeah.
And everybody stays on the helicopter until the team leader, or unless the team leader exits.
Particularly in elephant grass.
So I looked at it, and it's a slope. So even though it's this high on this side, I know it's going to be farther on that side. And sure as hell, if we jumped out, somebody was going to break an ankle or something. So I signaled to the other side to there's a strap that you can pull and then unroll the
ladder?
The ladder, the aluminum ladder. And I signaled to the other side. So we both dumped the aluminum ladders. And that pilot, instead of staying at that level, which for him it was probably scary, was probably considered dangerous to be that low on a slope, he extended it so that he lifted up, so it's now the whole 28 feet of the ladder. I'm carrying the radio, as I always did on insert and extract, so that I didn't have to go through somebody else to tell the air what I needed. So I've got the radio in the rucksack, and I turn around, well, we're going to go in, like it or not. And that ladder, we'd flown through a rainstorm on the way out there, so that in my boots, I'd been hanging my feet out the window or out the door. And the skids were wet. So I got one foot on a rung and pivoted around to get the other foot. And as quick as I did, I mistakenly was stepping on the first rung below the skid. Ooh. Once you put your weight on it, it goes whoop, like that. Right?
Yeah, it goes under the skid.
Under the skid. Boom! I'm free falling.
Oh my God.
And I hit with my back, with a rucksack, hyperextended my spine, hit so hard that I did not know where I was. I had amnesia.
Oh my God.
Honest to God, I had to be medevaced out of there.
And the elephant grass didn't help the fall any.
Well, this time there were some stumps in the area from an old slash bird.
Yeah.
I missed a stump like that by about 2 feet. If I'd have hit that, I'd have been dead.
Oh, yeah, you're a goner.
But as it is, my whole life I've used firearms.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember I read Small Arms of the World as a kid.
Right.
Guess who was so out of it? I don't know I'm a team leader. I don't know where I am. I don't know my name. I left my car 15 laying there.
Ooh.
And got over to into the brush, into the jungle on the side. And my assistant team leader, 50 years, I had amnesia. Anyway, Lyle Dover. Dover. Okay. He's talking to me, and I don't know who he is. I don't know what we're doing there. And he gets Covey. He takes the radio away from me.
Yeah.
And he gets Covey, and they come in. They pick up all of us. I get back to Dock Toe, and I get off the aircraft, and there are people that I know there, and I know them. And I look at him and say, "Why, you're..." And it doesn't flow.
Doesn't click.
I tried to say my Social Security number. 47. I had amnesia. I had to be hospitalized.
Oh, my God.
In Pleiku, and it took me about 3 days. Third day, I could, it was coming back. Things were still a little shady. But when I got back to Khartoum, that sorry SOB we had for an S3 told me that if I wasn't going to take the team back out, he was going to turn it over to Dover. It was my mission. I was assigned that mission. I was not going to let someone else be running it.
Yeah.
Because it's not an ego thing. It's a responsibility. That's my team. I had that mission. I'm not going to punk out and let somebody else do it. So even though, my back had, been spasming. I had a concussion. I had bruises across the center of my back. My spine hurt. Next day I got on a ruck, got on a ship.
No.
We flew out and did it. Yep. And that wasn't very smart, but by God, I didn't quit. And after that,
yeah,
I think some of the powers that you'd be, Bob Howard was one, because he'd come back. He was about to, he had received his medal by then.
Yeah, and he wanted to go to the field. They said, Ixnay.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
You're not going to the field. He was a captain now.
Ooh.
So anyway, so Bob Howard came in and talked to me a little bit, and they had a meeting talking about me. And lo and behold, I was invited to be a Covey rider. Said, you've got all this time on the ground. We're in all these missions. The best place for you to be now, you scrambled brain idiot, is to fly Covey so that you can help the guys on the ground.
Yeah.
And that's when I became a Covey rider. Shortly, it was November of 1970, which is 1 month short of having had 2 full years in Recon.
Wow.
So I flew the whole next year. Yep. That was my 3rd tour.
And just for our listeners, again, the Covey rider, in your case, what your job would be, you're the guy that relates to the troops on the ground, the Air Force pilot. By then, are you in OV-10s? Or are you still
for some missions?
O2s?
Well, we got both O2s and OV-10s.
Okay.
The OV-10 aircraft is fabulous because unlike the O2, which is unarmed other than marking rockets,
right,
the OV-10 has 4 M60 machine guns.
4?
4, 2 on each pylons, 2 on each side. And I think it was 2,000 rounds of ammo.
Wow.
It's not a lot, but it's better than not having it.
Better than O2 to just give you a couple markers.
It had 2 rocket pods under each wing. 2 of those were marking rockets, but 2 of them were high explosive, so that he could be firing 2.75-inch HE in support of a team. It wasn't enough to win a battle, but it was enough to buy time. That meanwhile, the pilot's talking to get fighters out there.
To get TAC air for you.
Yeah. A lot of guys, a lot of lives saved that way.
Right. And so during this tenure, how many missions did you fly as a Covey rider then?
I have had times after I came back from Vietnam, I would mention it, and pilots who flew over there would look and say, got a liar here.
Yeah.
Because they were limited amount of time they could fly. Crew time. They had to rest after so many hours. It was actually regulation, so they didn't fall asleep and destroy Uncle Sam's airplanes.
But for Covey riders,
we're not air crew.
Yeah.
So there was no limit on the number of missions that we flew or the number of hours. I flew just short of 400 missions, but some of that was the Huey missions. I'd already flown before that. Combat assaults. And 1,550 hours.
Wow.
Which there are a lot of pilots that didn't do the half of that.
Sure.
Which no insult whatsoever. It's just, we had no limits.
So during that tour of duty as a Covey rider, there's one mission in particular that was with RT Colorado.
Yes.
And that's a mission that that was a classic example of where a Covey rider comes in, the team on the ground, the radio operator they're under fire, and the enemy's coming in on them.
Right.
They need close air support, and the radio operator is a little bit uptight, and you came in and first thing you had to do was to calm him down.
Right.
And then get on with the mission. And
well, it was even a little more complicated than that.
Okay. Because that's your 400 plus missions. This is the one that sticks in your mind.
400 almost missions. It's like 350 plus. I was inducted into the U.S. Air Force Air Command Hall of Fame, the only Army guy ever to be inducted.
Right.
Because I had all those missions, and I was proposed by a couple of the Covey pilots, so that I'm the Air Command Hall of Fame.
Wow.
But anyways, I flew a hell of a lot of missions, but at that point it was only, we could absolutely clearly document 350 without getting into the Huey missions and so on and some of the late ones, so we said 350.
Right.
But anyways, so I was flying a lot and putting in airstrikes every damn day. God knows how many airstrikes we put in.
Right.
Because sometimes we'd be out there flying around, find a target, boom, you call it an airstrike. And every time you inserted a team, you had TAC Air out there to support them. Team doesn't need it, you go bomb something. Every time you extract, team's coming out. If they don't need the air that you've got stacked up, you expend it. Well, anyways, I had been back. I had flown first light with an OV-10 out of Pleiku Air Force Base. And we flew back for lunch because you also have to refuel.
Of course.
Went back, refueled. In the meantime, there was an O2 out there. And it was, I think it was Ken Carpenter, was a Covey rider aboard that O2. But we're flying back. And as the pilot's flying along, he's changing the radio frequencies because he has to be in contact with various locations en route. And finally, we're about 50 miles out. He turns the frequency on FM to our tactical FM radio frequency. And when he does, and he's got a whole host of radios. He's got FM, UHF, and VHF, and sometimes multiples of those. So you're hearing all kinds of chatter, but he turns that FM, and right away, I can hear that Ken Carpenter is talking to the guys on the ground, and they've got a Prairie Fire emergency. That's a dire emergency where you better get them all the air in the world now, or you're not going to get them out. And it's really, it's a last stand kind of situation. So he had not yet got the choppers out there, and we had an OV-10 that was the other aircraft O2 did not have armament other than marking rockets.
Right.
Ours had 4 M60 machine guns and those high HE rockets. So when we're about 10 miles out, he turned the ball game over to me. That's what we referred to all the various things, orchestrations you have to do when extracting a team.
Sure.
Because you have fighters up here.
Those are fast movers.
No, it could be A1s.
A1 Sky
I
Raiders.
would rather have A1s because
sure.
they're slower and they carry a lot more ordnance. And it's better ordnance for close air support. They have napalm, multiple
CBUs.
20 millimeter cannons, and cluster bombs. But it's the right kind of cluster bomb. It drops in a stream rather than this huge area, which you can't bring that stuff the CBU 25, you couldn't bring it that close
Right.
to a team. So anyways, we had fighters up here at probably about 7,000 feet, A1s, down lower, but still in orbit out here. We had Hueys that had just got there, and the Cobras are down low shooting for the team and also ready to counter enemy ground fire. Regis Gamitter is on the radio, and in the excitement of them taking fire, the helicopters taking fire, the NVA are right out there, he is shouting into the radio. He isn't even thinking about how loud that really is. But he's excited, understandably so. Someone is trying to kill him and his team. And I first calmed him down. That was the way I calmed down, Regis Gamitter. And the choppers were ready to come in. Just as they're ready to come in, I can barely hear a voice, a whispering voice saying, "Prairie Fire, Prairie Fire, Prairie Fire." It's not Regis Gamitter. The nearest team we have in that AO, about 10, 12 miles away, is Recon Team Colorado. And I recognize the team leader's voice. It's Pat Mitchell.
Pat Mitchell.
Right. And I tell him, negative. He says, "We need help now." I said, negative. I've got a Prairie Fire. I've got to get this first, and then I'll be right over there. So I'm talking to the helicopters and so on, getting everything lined up. They'd taken ground fire the first time they went in, then the Cobras went down there. Well, we've got an armed aircraft. So I called Cobra lead, and I said, "Listen, how about if you take over this ball game, and we will head over to this other team. We've got another Prairie Fire going." And he said, very understandably, negative, because if you go, we cannot get TAC air.
Oh.
The A1s, the radio nets and procedures and so on are such that he can't call in air. So we have to stay there. And I'm going, oh, God. And there's Pat Mitchell again. Prairie Fire, Prairie Fire, Prairie Fire. And I can hear some gunfire. Oh, God. And I have to come back on there and I'd say, I forget the call sign. But I tell him, evade. We will come there ASAP, but I've got a Prairie Fire over here.
Oh.
What else can you say?
Yeah, it's the truth of the matter.
It's the truth of the matter. And, you had to make some hard decisions there. You're going to, and this was my own team, this Recon Team Hawaii, just after when I had the fall from the helicopter. So the Hueys come back, and I can see the first one made it in without ground fire. And as quick as the guys, it was going to be a 2-ship extraction.
Right.
As soon as that first one lifted away and the second one was coming in, I said, "Let's go." So we flew down. I told the pilot, "Let's go." So, and the A1s had been expended by then in support against ground fire. Yeah. So we don't have any TAC air at that moment. And we head down. Takes maybe 5 minutes of flying to get there. And I'm telling Pat, hold on. We're on the way.
Oh, my
and
God.
And he's there, Prairie Fire. I said, "Where are they?" "They're all around us, all around us." And he already had one American dead.
David Mixter. Who died saving
St. Laurent.
His life.
Yep, saving his life. He took the blast. He had he was carrying a sawed-off RPD machine gun, a Chinese machine gun. And there was an NVA about to shoot St. Laurent. He stood up and got the NVA, but when he did, he exposed himself to an RPG gunner who fired him, and it hit the ground at his feet. He was dead right away. It was terrible. To which Pat Mitchell was an SF medic, and he absolutely was doing everything he could, but he was dead. Gone. And meanwhile, he's patching up St. Laurent, and he still has the Indige there. Well, the Indige run off and leave him because they think the team's about to be overrun.
Right.
So his Montagnards take off. So it's just Pat and St. Laurent. And we nicknamed him, or his call sign was Lurch.
Right.
For Dave Mixter.
Because he was
a big, huge guy.
Yeah.
But really good guy. Which that's the problem, really. If you start bringing guys on operations where they're really big, and there are normal-sized people with them, what do you do if you got a badly wounded guy that's that big? What are the options? Anyways,
There aren't many.
Mixter was unfortunately, and God bless his soul,
Yeah.
he was dead.
And he's after saving St. Laurent's life.
Yep. And incidentally, this entire sequence was recorded. I don't know if you ever knew that.
I did.
Did you know that it's on YouTube?
I didn't know it was on YouTube.
Yeah. Not because of me.
No.
Somebody somewhere. Because it was the helicopter pilots, I think, that recorded it. But nevertheless.
They did, yeah.
I'm now overhead. And Pat's down there. And I tell him, listen, give me a direction and a distance. We're ready to come in hot. And he says, can't do. We got a ditch out there. I don't know where they are. I said, Pat, and you can hear, if ever you go to YouTube and hear it. I said, partner, we got to worry about the living. The yards made their own decision. Now, where do you want the air? And at that point, he started calling the air around him. And I could see that the nearest LZ that we could get to, even with strings, was a couple 100 meters away. We had to get him over there. So we rocketed the area in between, and choppers were now on the way out. A1s at just about, another pair of A1s were just about there. But, time is life and death.
Oh, sure.
The North Vietnamese didn't take some dead just to say, oh, well, that's a bad day. Black Rock. They undoubtedly were sending more troops out there. And the ones who had been wounded in that exchange, whoever was with them, they were still out there. So Pat did not want to move. Pat did not want to. He could not bear leaving his good friend, David Mixter, lurch behind, even though he was dead. And I had to tell him, it's all but giving an order.
In your book, that's right, you gave it, you said, Mitchell realized that St. Laurent was badly hit and he'd need help to walk, but Lurch was there too, only a few yards away. David Mixter had died, saving their lives. I'm with Lurch, Mitchell radioed. I can still see Lurch. I can't leave him. And then you shared your anguish, and you could hear it in Mitchell's voice.
See, I had to stay calm the whole time.
Yeah.
Just that big voice in the sky.
Literally. And then you got your fatherly tone in place. Said you can't be worried about the dead right now. We've got to be concerned about the living. Now get moving. You gave them a direct order.
Yep.
And fortunately, they did. My
Yep.
God. And you were able to get them out.
Both of them alive.
Wow.
And St. Laurent survived. He was badly wounded. He took.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I talked to him a while ago, and he said it took him over a year to rehab, and he still has pain and suffering internal from that day in Laos.
We were lucky to get those guys out at all.
Indeed.
And that they held out like that while we were pulling Recon Team Hawaii. And I kept hearing that. He came up on the air a couple times.
Prairie
even
Fire,
more than,
Prairie
this
Fire.
voice, whispering. The NBA were so close. He had to be whispering, Prairie Fire, Prairie Fire, Prairie Fire. It still gives me shivers.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, we're at that point where I'd like to talk a little bit about your life afterwards.
Okay.
Because you did have a total of 8 books. Besides the SOG and the Secret Commandos, we have the history of sniping and sharpshooting in the Civil War. They had SOG, the Secret Wars of America's Commandos, sniping in the trenches for World War I, and then the Ultimate Sniper, which we know some people that have turned to that book. And yes, this is a weighty book that's not available now, but we'll be coming back with a new edition soon.
Yes, it should be coming out before the end of the year.
And again, for anybody that knows anything or wants to know anything about snipers, we've had people who have gone through Army sniper training that said that book is better than a lot of the manuals. It's so well put together.
Well, I had instructed sniping by the time I wrote this, for 10 years.
So how'd you get involved in sniping, first of all, after a career running Recon? And then at some point, we got to mention the fact that you worked with the legend, all-time sniper legend from Vietnam, Carlos Hathcock.
Yeah, but that's a very loose term, work. I knew him.
Okay. But
I was at his house. I helped tell his story.
Yeah.
If you ever go online and see Carlos being interviewed, it was the only interview he ever did, because he knew, unlike the idiots in the media, he wouldn't be asked, how does it feel to kill a man?
Yeah.
How many kills? What's your, that trivial stuff that real people don't want to hear.
No.
But my voice is there. I'm the guy asking the questions. It's the only interview he ever gave.
No kidding.
No kidding. Because he knew I'd treat him square.
Sure.
But back in 83, I'd received a direct commission. I was by then a captain. And I was appointed the chief of marksmanship for Minnesota, which is a position in the reserve components that you are responsible for all the competition and advanced marksmanship training in a state. Each state has one of these. I wanted to train people to do recon, but
and you loved boy toys all your life.
Yeah. But there was no place to instruct recon. Nobody wanted to learn recon, and the big folks that run the Army didn't see the value.
Of course,
it's all about tanks and nuclear weapons. Or
big Army stuff.
Big Army stuff.
Yeah.
Well, I had all that recon experience. Plus, I'd been a competitive shooter, and I'd shot the M14. And I was a pretty good shot with bolt guns. So I combined the two. I had enough power at that time that I could actually talk to some of the senior people.
Yeah.
And I knew that every National Guard Army for an infantry unit had a handful of M1 Deltas, 30-06 with 2.5 power scopes. And they were there for civil disturbances. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, really. And they'd undoubtedly deploy with them to war. But the first thought was so you could fire to support troops that are taking fire during a riot or something.
Right.
But there was no training whatsoever anywhere in the system.
In the entire state of Minnesota?
No, I mean throughout the Army system.
No.
Throughout the Guard system. Throughout the Army did not have a sniper school in 1983. That is when SODIC at Fort Bragg opened their course.
Right. Okay.
Betting, I think it's 86 or 87 before they started their course. Yeah. So I managed to persuade a two-star general that all we really needed was a weekend drill and one extra day to do a quick school. And we did it. We learned from it. I recruited instructors. I had marksmanship instructors and tactics instructors. I had national level marksmanship instructors. I mean, President's 100. That's the 100 highest rifle shots in the country.
Wow.
They really knew their F's on long-range rifle shooting. And on the other hand, I had some really experienced guys who'd been instructors before that really knew infantry tactics. So I educated them on sniping. I looked everywhere to try to find a worthwhile manual, and I couldn't. So I started collecting handouts, anything under the sun. If you go back and look at TC 2214, I think it is. Okay.
I think so.
That was a sniper training book back then. It's a cut and paste from most other manuals. About tactics, about night, about there isn't a whole lot. They didn't even have a ballistic table for a 308 in there, or 30-06.
Really?
Yeah, with drops,
sure,
and muzzle velocity and so on. So I don't know that I was the first one to ever make data cards, but I made data cards, and I had never seen them before. It just made good sense. Not long thereafter, people started making them commercially because I think they bought my book and said we should. Hats off to them. flattered.
It's the
by-
American way.
It's the American way. And the more people know the correct shit, the better we all are. So it was a successful school. And the second time around, we extended it a couple more days. And we opened it up to Air Guard and units in the Midwest and even a couple state police agencies
Yeah.
in Minnesota. This is up at Camp Ripley, Minnesota.
Because by now, SWAT was beginning to emerge nationally.
Seriously, yeah.
Yes.
And I'll tell you, there was no insult to police, but there were not that many cops that were heavy-duty veterans. They were good people, but
Right.
they just didn't have that experience. And for instance, I won't name the department, but there are a number of departments that the snipers had 223 bolt guns. The theory was that they should have a cartridge that matches that of the ARs that their entry teams had so they could exchange ammo. And they were shooting ball ammo, and they didn't know because they hadn't had enough experience.
Right.
And it was, Gunsight existed. They didn't have a precision rifle course at Gunsight at that point, I don't think.
This is the early days of Gunsight, which is still one of the premier, if not the
Right.
premier weapons instruction site in the country.
And I think Mid-South may have had precision rifle by then. That's a really good outfit. And there were
Yeah,
some
this is
others.
out of my league.
Yeah, but nevertheless,
Sure.
there were some, but very few. And the great thing was we finally got direct funding from National Guard Bureau in Washington. So through the war on drugs. So we could open it up to police across the country. Not only that, but do MTTs, mobile training teams, where we go into an area and a bunch of different agencies come together.
Sure.
And their students, we didn't charge them a dime
Wow.
for the instruction. And we structured it so that it could be during the work week, Monday through Friday, because we learned about how a police department is going to say no if there's a Saturday because they don't want to pay the overtime. You know,
Sure.
That's just the way it is. And we found that in most states, officers had a requirement for continuing education, so many hours per year. So I put together I'm talking to guys in the business, civilian police. I put together a package and got our curriculum approved at the state level in Minnesota for continuing educational law enforcement officers. I forget the number of hours they gave us. But therefore, it could meet the requirement for continuing educational law officers, and therefore some of the departments would justify the additional expense of sending them, putting them up in a motel and feeding them and so on, because it's training. It is credited training. So eventually we instructed officers from more than 100 departments. And it was a really good deal.
Wow.
And we loved doing it.
Yeah.
Then I butted heads with some senior officers, and thus ended my military career. But the sniper school did not end. The National Guard Bureau moved it to Arkansas,
Yeah.
which we used to shoot national competition down there on the ranges at Camp Robinson. So it is now at Camp Robinson. It's conducted.
Was that new National Guard Center, the really huge one?
Right. But it's
'Cause
part of it. Yes.
You want to hear a funny story? Just a quick sidebar. They were going to name that the John T. Walton training facility.
Honest to God. They are or they were.
They were. And they went to the family, and the family said ixnay.
They don't want it associated with violence
I
or something.
don't know what the reason was. They didn't bother talking to me.
John Walton was a fellow SOG veteran. He unfortunately passed away in an airplane crash.
Indeed.
But he was a member of the Walton family
Ran
from
Recon
Walmart.
up north and with you guys.
Yep, he
Pontoon.
ran Recon, and he was awarded a Silver Star. He was wounded. At one point, he called an airstrike on himself, on his team, because he needed that, or they were going to be overrun. But
Yeah.
getting back to what's
Yes.
great today is that school down in Arkansas is taught in 2-week increments to fit annual training periods of soldiers. And I forget, it's like to go through 2 of those, in other words, 4 weeks. That school is the only school in the Army system that can award the designator for an Army qualified sniper, other than Fort Benning at the Army Sniper School.
Wow, no kidding.
That's the way it is.
Wow. And so that, when you first started that, the Marine Corps had snipers, but the Army didn't?
The Marine Corps sniper schools had gone belly up too.
Oh, is that right?
It was Carlos Hathcock who
Sure.
brought it back in 1976.
Yeah.
And his great advocate at Headquarters Marine Corps was Jim Land. Jim Land had instructed snipers way back in Vietnam as a captain. He was now a major. And he was the marksmanship chief for the whole Marine Corps. He was close enough to get some generals' ears. So he had a plan. He did this phase by phase. First, he got an authorization, I think it was for the rifles, that they needed quality rifles. They could build them in-house, which they do. They have outstanding armors to hand build these babies. So they take out Remington 700s and build them. Then he managed to get a school. Initially, it was only at Quantico, a basic school. Then he managed to get MOSs. Unlike the Army, that's an additional skill identifier.
Right.
ASI. In the Marine Corps, it is an MOS, which means that is their assignment, period. And there are slots. He also got the slots in each regiment, Marine regiment, for snipers.
Wow.
Carlos did all of that, but it only started in '76. And it took him a couple years to persuade, to pester enough generals. Which, by the way, he after retirement, he was also the secretary full-time of the NRA. And I got to know him. He's a great guy.
Oh, is that right?
In fact, I dedicated my book, Sniping in the Trenches, to Jim Land.
Oh, wow. Well, look, we're at that point, sir. It's been a very quick 3 hours. And
wow.
Yeah, I know. Time flies. And so many stories. We could do a lot more. And we've only just touched the surface today with the Secret Commandos book. And, of course, there's SOG, which is the outstanding history. We didn't even open this today because there's so many stories here that your firsthand service to our country. Any closing thoughts?
Absolutely. I wrote this book to make sure that 25 years after the fact, when it could finally be declassified, that the story of SOG was told accurately. I did an incredible amount of research on it.
How many years?
3 years, just on that book.
Wow.
And I wanted to make sure, because there are a lot of guys that gave their lives. There are a lot of guys that risked their lives. And I wanted to make sure they were not forgotten. 100 years from now, people will know what SOG is, just like we can go back to the Civil War and Berdan's sharpshooters or something. And I wrote Secret Commandos because I wanted, from my own perspective, not, hey, boy, am I tough, cool. No, that's silliness. I can't stand those.
Yeah, but you mixed it with all the other guys' stories.
It's all the other guys' stories, too.
And the men you served with.
Yes.
John Allen, Bob Howard, my God.
All of those guys. And the Americans needed to know what they did. I am merely an ambassador for the rest of the guys in SOG.
Well, you're also, in my humble opinion, the godfather of SOG nonfiction writers, in my humble opinion. And also, before we close, there was a 1998 media outlet that just disparaged the Special Forces, one mission. We won't even get into it to waste of time here. But from that, you worked very hard clarifying the record. And as a result of that erroneous report, you worked behind the scenes for several years on an effort to get the Presidential Unit Citation, which was awarded to SOG April 1st, 2000.
Right.
And you were one of the key players that worked behind the scenes on that. And that was the first, other than the defamatory reporting from 1998, that was erroneous, and then the recovery, which there's minimal coverage of the corrections and the lawsuits thereafter. But the PUC was the first time that SOG was publicly recognized.
Officially recognized. It really existed.
And the
They
PUC
really did a
is-
lot of top secret stuff across the border in Laos, Cambodia, and North Vietnam.
And you helped to pen some of the paperwork there?
I
Quietly.
was a glorified clerk, but I'm as persistent
major
as
clerk.
a junkyard dog having the bite around the leg of the Department of Defense. But we had wonderful support there. It's just that it was dealing with bureaucracy.
Indeed.
The chairman of the Joint Chiefs personally pushed on it. The Secretary of Defense did too.
And at that
Cohen,
time, it was
Secretary of
Cohen.
Defense Cohen,
Sir,
yes.
Secretary Cohen, yes.
Right.
So with that, as a result of that, your effort behind the scenes for several years,
I made a hell of a good clerk.
a hell of a good clerk. We'll close on that note, but we want to thank you because as a result of that, the Presidential Unit Citation, which is the equivalent of a Distinguished Service Cross, which is the second highest medal of valor
Right.
our country awards, and that was to SOG.
Right.
And we salute you for that. So on that note, we'll close. We thank you for coming in today, and then hope to see you another time. Maybe we'll come back and talk some more about sniping. But either way, thank you for your service, your years of dedication, getting out the SOG, the stories, and helping snipers and our SWAT teams be better SWATs. Thank you.
Thank you, John, for all you have done to tell our story.
Pleasure's all mine. Airborne.
Airborne.
All right. John Plaster has left the studio, and today we're honored to have with us our new temporary technician, Chad.
Nice to meet y'all.
Indeed. Well, thank you for coming out to fill in today. Our normal top secret clandestine agent is working out of country, and so anyway, thanks for filling in. Of course, just for our listening audience, Chad spent a little bit of time in the 101st Airborne. He's an airborne troop, and he also works with Tactical Rifleman.
Yep.
And
Old Carl
Erickson the first. And last night we had episode number 98.
Yes. That was an amazing show.
That was fun.
Having you and John on there.
Well, more importantly today, now that you heard John's stories, so many, as a fellow airborne paratrooper, what do you think?
It's just amazing. It's kind of funny how everything comes around kind of full circle in the end. But many, many years ago, as a younger soldier, getting ready to get a team, deploying to Afghanistan after being in Iraq, I was on orders for sniper school, and I had been familiar with John Plaster then, and had his book. Actually, the one you showed earlier, it's actually my book.
Yeah.
I've got the Secret Commandos book that is signed by John Plaster, and it's great to have read them stories back then and to have him telling stories now and remembering that first time I heard the story. It's like hearing it again, and hearing it come out of his mouth is just amazing. And then, listen to you tell stories, and it's great to connect with that history.
Oh, yeah.
You guys are your whole generation is amazing.
Well, and then with John's stories, I just haven't had a chance to go back and look at the books. When they came out, I read them. I go like, wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you come back today,
is wow.
Getting ready for the show again.
Yeah.
It's like, oh my God.
It's amazing.
He worked with so many men. And like, again, with SOG in 68, there were 6 FOBs up and running missions. And he was down at 2. I was up at 1. We never knew each other.
Yeah.
And then there were guys that were down south.
Yeah.
Again, but that dichotomy, and one thing was for sure, the missions across the fence, whether you're in Cambodia or the tri-border area or the southern Laotian, where the Khartoum did everything there.
Yeah.
And then up
just
north.
Amazing.
Oh, the stories.
You guys, yeah.
I'm
at a loss for words, really. Just to get to sit here in the studio and listen to that while recording it.
Oh, yeah.
Getting chills. He mentioned when he was talking, he said, it's giving me chills talking about it. Yeah, you're not the only one. I'm getting chills listening.
Well, also, one of the other things that I had forgotten about was that in the first book, we talked about, John wrote about the casualties.
Yeah.
And the total numbers of people that were killed. And I think, I mismarked it, but like 199?
300. That was low because some of the casualties are not attributed to
right. So anyways, and we always talk about how many actual Green Berets ran missions across the fence, like depends on who you talk to, 700, maybe 800 out of the 3.2 million Americans that served in the Vietnam War. And so anyways, these are the Bible, the stories, and the men. Just reading about Bob Howard and having walked with these giants.
Yeah.
And there's other Medal of Honor recipients, Fred Zabatowski, Franklin. These men were all there. These are all at Khartoum.
Yeah, Carl on the show last night said, keep this in mind when you see that older gentleman, walking along with his his hat on, and realize that you're walking amongst giants, really, because these guys, everything in those two books is just amazing.
Well, yeah, and one of the stories we didn't get into today was how at one point I think John had gone flying Covey.
Yeah.
And he hears this beeper thing.
Yeah.
And Stormy 03, it turns out this Eldon Bargewell's team, who by that time was a staff sergeant, and he was in the middle of a huge firefight after being shot in the face by the NVA and given his team cover fire when the team was extracted, but he was still down there with his RPD.
Yeah.
Just amazing.
Was that the one where he said he was out flying? They were sightseeing in Covey?
Yeah.
Yeah, that one.
Just checking the area out.
Checking the area out.
Just another day in solid, flying Covey. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Oh, yeah. So any other side notes or your first impressions from seeing it firsthand? And
well, I can tell you that my impression is that just like our show last night, which I kind of feel like for people that don't know, he mentioned show number 98, live stream on YouTube for Tactical Rifleman. It's not a sales pitch or trying to get you to watch, but my impression is that's probably going to be one of our best shows ever, just because, we've got Carl, he's Carl, but we have John Strykermeyer on the show, and we've got John Plaster on the show.
How many years
great.
in SF?
Yeah,
2 decades?
Yeah. To see that range and type and quality of person sitting at the desk at one time. People like that, and they like to hear about the history and I'm a big I'm a big believer in those who forget the past are destined to repeat it, and I think that telling them stories and hearing about the history of MAC V SOG, the things that happened in Vietnam and that kind of stuff, it doesn't let the men that died, they're not forgotten.
No, that's what the book
carries them on.
Absolutely.
So,
well, we'll close on that note then.
Yeah.
Thank you for pitching in today to help out.
It's great honor.
Appreciate it.
Great honor.
And so as we come to a close here, again, we always thank Jocko Productions for making this possible, and for SOG Chronicles co-working with them. And we want to thank all the veterans out there, and encourage people to buy John's books. And today, there are men and women that are serving our country, like John Plaster. From our era today, there are men and women who are fighting for our country. They are fighting for our values of the country. And John is truly one of our American heroes, and he's done much as a historian. To those of you out there on the front lines today, we thank you for fighting for all of us and for our values as a country. And we thank the first responders, police, law enforcement, border patrol, even the Secret Service, because they have a tough job. And paramedics, first defenders, first responders, and of course to all of our armed services, up to and including today's Space Force. And we want to also say one final thank you to those who didn't come home. God bless America.
God bless.